tonight there are several movies. We will either see the Bogart movies or Shelley Winters' fantastic movie or a couple of other movies I'm not familiar with. Unless there's some other request, we might give our television a rest. However, if there's enough requests for some television movie, we will consider that. Due to the long meeting of last night, there will be a cancellation of the extra socialist class. But do be prepared for the news that I have given now, so that you will be ready for socialist testing, thorough testing. We're going to have to get down to writing tomorrow night and People's Rally Saturday. Being that Zaire has turned so sharply as a friend of the Angolan people, when it was almost considered to be in the pocket of USA imperialism, I think I will give you the background of Zaire once again. It is located in South Central Africa. West is the Congo, the People's Republic, Marxist, Leninist nation of the People's Republic of Congo. They are the ones that secretly worked out the peace treaties and negotiations between Zaire and Angola. North is the Central African Republic and the Sudan. You know the Sudan, where they're having 100 cities wiped out by floods. East is Uganda, with Papa Idi Amin, who said that the Cubans were the heroes of Africa. Also east is Rwanda, Burundi, B-U-R-U-N-D-I, and Tanzania, a socialist country that's being aided economically now by China. Southeast is Zambia. Southwest is Angola. Zaire puts out a skinny leg to the Atlantic, where it has a 20-mile coastline. Cuba today, just now, by the way, has denounced the United States for some new plot to destroy its government because of its involvement in Africa. Cuba appeals to China to follow its own international course of communism and not allow itself to be used as a tool of capitalism. How was Zaire created? Former Belgian Congo, whose frontiers emerged from the consent of the neighboring colonial powers, the white domination of Britain, France, and Portugal. It won freedom of sorts from Belgium in 1960. Belgium is B-E-L-G-I-U-M. Temporarily lost Katanga province. Those people were independent and free and voted their own independence. But U.S. imperialists and French and Belgium imperialists would not allow the Katanga province to be free. That's K-A-T-A-N-G-A, now known as Shava. But that was forcefully reunited with it in 1964. The size of Zaire is 905,365 square miles, 12 times the size of Guyana, 77 times the size of its former colonial master. I like to remind us of that. That's why I'm repeating. That shows you the unfairness of colonialism, imperialism. Portugal, its colonial master, was 77 times smaller than its colony of Zaire. And equal Zaire is to the third of the U.S., which is east of the Mississippi. That's a large, large area indeed. All the USA east of the Mississippi, from Florida upwards to Maine. Population is 25 million. So there's double the population in Zaire that there is in Guyana, which, as I said, is the only place for people to be because there's more land, more food, and less population than any place in the world. Luba tribes are 17.7%. The Mongo, M-O-N-G-O, including the Tortella, is 16.9%. The Congo, K-O-N-G-O, 12.3%. Rwanda, 10%. About 200 other groups are 43.2%. 50% due to Zaire's nationalist strong-arm leader, Mobutu, has maintained the native religion that goes back eons of time into our Indian and black culture, animism, that recognizes sacred regard for all life, minerals, rocks, animals, and human. Less than 50% are Christian. Who rules? The current dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko, is head of state and government by way of coup d'etat. He took over by military force in 1965. The 1967 Constitution theoretically provides for a 420-member National Assembly. But the head of state really rules, and the government does pretty much what he wants while the National Assembly nods. The remnants of the old mining companies, now somewhat controlled by the government, still wield some power. But as I told you, the miracle change that's taking place in Zaire is perfectly astounding. It will hearten the soul of Patrice Lumumba, who's gone on in some other form, who was killed so mercilessly trying to free Zaire, the Congo, and he was murdered by the CIA. Although at the time of independence the Congo's living standard was the highest in black Africa, the Belgian rule had been essentially paternalistic. They had given more benefits, at least, to its people. The Belgians are the ones that spoke out today against USA in some of its neo-fascist practices, like the lifting of the ban of arms to Rhodesia. The Belgian rule had been essentially paternalistic, as I said. Colonial capitalist monopolies raped the country of its mineral wealth, while plantation owners, many multinational U.S. corporations, raped the native populace to obtain a labor force. The old regime had not given any administrative responsibility to the natives, and there was no secondary education, no high school education for any citizen that was black or brown until the 50s. Consequently, with the Belgians' sudden departure in 1960, the Congo was left in the lurch. Internal strife followed independence. The provinces of Kasai, K-A-S-A-I, Kivu, K-I-V-U, and Katanga, on whose mineral deposits the rest of the world depended economically, all broke away. The country more or less pulled itself back together again in 1964. In 1965, after some minor rebellions, Colonel Joseph D. Mobutu, now Mobutu Sese Seko, the tough Israeli-trained paratrooper, regained control. That's the second time someone trained by fascists like Israel has exercised independence. Idi Amin was also pro-Israel at one time and is now anti-Israel, anti-U.S. He regained control, Mobutu did, and established a strong central government. In 1970, he was elected as the only candidate to a 7-year term as president. He has since set about getting cash for industrial development from the Western countries for the most part, but now with the new change, he is going to use an international train railway linking the Zaire government and Angola so that he can ship his raw materials to Angola and sell them to the highest bidder. If that's socialist, he has said it makes no difference to him. He has apparently been disillusioned by being used when he found out that the imperialist U.S. and her lackeys was buying his raw materials under world prices. Capitalists don't even look after their own. But at the same time, he's expelling foreigners now and Africanizing all culture. He has banned neckties and Christian names and has changed the date of the celebration of Christmas. He will not allow Christ to be honored or no pictures of any of the white Christians to be placed on any public walls. That was the encouraging thing that I guess finally allowed him to develop his independent mind. Leyland Motors, Fiat, and Peugeot have auto assembly plants here, and General Motors and Ford were soon to follow. But now Zaire is putting up barriers. This is a strange, as I said, fantastically strange happening. Zaire has huge mineral wealth. GM and Ford, of course, is U.S. multinational monopolies who have milked and bled people all over the world and helped with their money to overthrow governments and assassinate, torture, and kill people. Zaire has huge mineral wealth. It is the world's 5th largest producer of copper, which constitutes 2/3 of its exports. It also produces smaller amounts, it also produces most of the world's industrial diamonds and smaller amounts of gold, cassiterite, Cassiterite, manganese, zinc, cobalt, silver. It's uranium, one of the only known sources during World War II, made possible the world's first atomic bomb. As you know, 85% of uranium of the world is there, 90% of the cobalt. A national hero is Patrice Lumumba, Lumumba, the fiery first Prime Minister of Zaire. He was deposed in 1960, captured and killed while trying to get to the Canoe province. The CIA pulled his body for miles on a road behind a truck until his skin was pulled from his bones. He was then turned over to his arch enemy, Moshi Tshombe. At that speed, they pulled him, and he managed to survive. He was turned over to Moshi Tshombe of Katanga province, who then had him tortured and assassinated while his body was almost nearly comatose. Thus ends the commentary and giving of the news of the day. Study well, much love, give 3 gratitudes now. We have so much to be grateful for. I love you so very dearly.
Bapekisa kinga bandeko kombo ya Lumumba naloba te Mobutu andimi alobi naloba Banyokola kinga bandeko Balinga kinalela Lumumba te Lumumba kufeli l'unité nationale Mobutu atiye héros national Baseka kinga bandeko Nakoma kindeko bimana tango Basuyo na mandefu yo nationaliste Mobutu apekisi tribalisme Nakima kindako nanga bandeko Balinga kinalo bata Lumumba te Lelo la vérité ou rien que la vérité Mobutu akitani Lumumba Lumumba Héros national balingaki ndako na nga bandeko balingaki naloba ta Lumumba te lelo la vérité aurait que la vérité Mobutu akitani Lumumba
Context of White Supremacy, Katherine Massey Book Club, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information with non-white people on the system of white supremacy racism, what it is, and how it works. Today's date, Thursday, September 19, 2024. So I have been told. Gus T. Renegade, the worthless Negro from Virginia. Debut study session, brand new book. I'm so excited to read. Hopefully this is one point that makes the Katherine Massey Book Club the best book club in the known universe. We read books that you might not bump into under other circumstances or even hear about. Brand new book, Andrée Blouin's My Country, Africa, Autobiography of the Black Pasionaria. So excited to get to this here book, Global System of Racism, White Supremacy, and we are the biography kings, so I'm always excited to get back to reading a biography. I was tempted to just let the amazing sounds that we are hearing, that is Franco and L.O.K. Jazz, Lumumba, Hero National. This is one of the amazing songs that was referenced, featured in the documentary film Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, that I said easily the best film that I saw this year, easily the best film I saw at the Seattle International Film Festival, the only film that I was actually looking forward to seeing this calendar year. This here book, My Country, Africa, was read. They read several snippets from this book in that film, in fact. Now, one of the things that I hope also makes the Cows Book Club stand out is that what Dr. Welsing called connecting the dots. We had never heard a white socialist man like that, Jim Jones, start off the program and give, for the most part, a pretty accurate description of the local system of white supremacy racism in the Congo. We're going to get a lot more details, but it reminded me, he talked about the CIA involvement in the assassination of Lumumba. What was the book that we read? Oh, was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment where they included, was Jim Jones involved in sending mercenaries to Africa to do things like killing Patrice Lumumba? He didn't mention Lumumba there because he was going to Angola, but same thing. He even mentioned the mining operations. They are talking about that right now. Apple Corporation and all white people dominating and having Negro slaves doing the work and all of that. Once we get started on this book, it will immediately become apparent as well, connecting the dots. Devontae Hart, do you remember me? Reading, more important than watching television. We will get to it. Context of White Supremacy, the Katherine Massey Book Club. Andrée Blouin's My Country, Africa.
My Country, Africa, Autobiography of the Black Pasionaria, by Andrée Blouin, in collaboration with Jean McKellar. Part 1. Chapter 1. From the Village to the Orphanage. As punishment for the crime of being born of a white father and a black mother, I spent my early years in a prison for children. This prison was the orphanage for girls of mixed blood at Brazzaville in the French Congo. The time was the dark years of colonialism in Africa. At the orphanage, where we lived behind windows with thick bars, my companions and I were taught an abiding sense of shame and guilt for our parentage. All of us had been born out of wedlock, but that was not the worst of it. We were the issue of a white man's weakness for a black woman, and that was unpardonable. Because of this sin, as the nuns who ran the orphanage called it, we, the product of this sin, were in need of great purification. This the nuns were willing to supply. We girls were led to believe that by accepting their system of calculated humiliations and cruelties we could partially, although never entirely, expiate the offense which our lives represented. For 14 years I lived in a regime of daily penance as the nuns sought to redress the wickedness of my father and the primitive nature of my mother. That girls such as I were given opportunity to atone for our existence was considered one more proof of the white man's charity as he scourged the black man's land. It was while I was still in the orphanage prison that I first identified with the struggle for freedom of my black countrymen. Like them I was beaten with the chicot, a whip made of ox sinews. Like them I was the victim of injustices of which I hardly knew the name but against which my blood never ceased to rebel. For many years, however, I did not participate in the African struggle for self-determination. I could not overcome the resignation taught me by the nuns. I bowed my head, I held my tongue, I shut myself up in the dreary passiveness of the other women of my race. Only when I had been married, ironically, twice to white men, did I find the equilibrium and courage to become active in the cause of my people. Only then was I able to transcend my black and white inheritance and become more than the stereotype of each. To become, simply, a woman, a human being. It was then I opted to give my life to the struggle of the blacks. In this I was privileged to take part in the movement toward freedom of several African countries. I was to know some of the great leaders of Africa, and because of my passion for our cause, I was to be associated in their work. Within these pages I want to set down an account of my youth and the events that formed me for my work in that still unfinished struggle. I have always said that my political work was my own option, but perhaps I flatter myself. Really, there was no choice. My fate and that of the Africa I so ardently love have been intertwined from the beginning, and where there is love there is no option but to serve. This is the story of an African woman who, branded by the misery of her own youth, and inflamed by the injustices that she saw everywhere, finally could bow her head and hold her tongue no longer. I was born December 16, 1921 at Bessu, a little village on the Ubangui River in the French colony of Ubangui-Shari, which today is foolishly known as the Central African Empire. My mother, Josephine Wasimba, of the Banziri people in the Kwango, was then 14 years old. Her father, the fierce and powerful chief Zumag, possessed many wives. But his favorite was Josephine's mother, who was renowned for her beauty and character. She was the daughter of an important family of fishermen in the eastern region of the Belgian Congo. My father, Pierre Gerbalat, was a short, light-haired Frenchman with a far-away look in his eye and an iron will. He had an enormous capacity for work and was dedicated to the prospect of building his fortune in the still unknown jungles of the Dark Continent. The only son of a rich notary public in Lyons, he came to Equatorial Africa in 1906 as an agent for the Société Interfina, a large import-export company. He was then 26 years old. After a few years he left the Interfina company to try his luck on his own. First he hunted elephants for their ivory, but that proved a chancy business. Then, doubtless inspired by the fact that his father's chents had been chiefly the great silk industrialists of Lyons, he started a silkworm plantation. At Kim he put dozens of hectares of land into mulberry bushes. What he had not foreseen, however, was that the blacks in the area considered these caterpillars a gourmet delicacy. Within a short time his stock of silkworms was decimated and he had to abandon the project. Then he went into the transportation business, moving raw materials such as cotton, with a fleet of trucks. He also had a number of boats, which plied the Ubangui, a river of many rapids. This time he succeeded. Even today the story of my father and mother, while giving me much pain, astonishes me still. How did it happen that this 40-year-old man from an exceptionally bourgeois and traditional background should find himself captivated by a 13-year-old girl of a remote and primitive village? More astonishing still, perhaps, was that his fascination with this gay and delicate creature developed into an affection that was to endure for many years. Their liaison, crossing the barriers of a cruelly divided society, was to last my father's lifetime. While their situation was by no means unique in the colonial system, it seems to me that aspects of their relationship were. Pierre Gerbalat was still with the Société Interfina at the time he met Josephine Mwasimba. He had come to her village, which was about 200 kilometers from Bangui, as part of his rounds, selling articles that the people needed, such as salt and cloth, and buying raw materials for his company. He also planned to hunt elephants while he was there, as game was plentiful in this verdant land through which an immense river, the Shari, flowed. As there were no other forms of distraction in the village, the people honored this visiting white man with an evening of their traditional tam-tam music and dancing. In his seat as guest of honor, Pierre Gerbalat listened to the insistent beat of the African drums and watched the half-naked dancers stomping and leaping, their bodies gleaming, their faces joyous. Among these dancers were the Ungwis, girls specially chosen and trained, for whom the dance was a sacred rite. As he watched the Ungwis, he became intrigued by the form and manner of a very young girl. She was small and slender with tiny pointed breasts and hundreds of pearls sewn through her hair. He found her beautiful. And when she smiled, I believe Pierre Gerbalat trembled, for his life was never the same after that. Josephine was a child then, it was true, and she remained, in many ways, a child all her life, but there was an artless femininity about her, a sensual joy in living that set her apart. Charmed, Pierre Gerbalat watched this girl, dancing to please him. The smile she turned upon him burst with radiance. It was a smile that proclaimed the beauty of Africa, the beauty of life. Pierre Gerbalat could not take his eyes off her slender, animated form. Josephine continued to dance and flash her radiant smile in his direction. Out of all the women in the village dancing for this white man, Josephine knew how to make herself noticed. She knew how to make herself deeply desired. Disconcerted, Pierre Gerbalat asked a companion, "Who is that girl?" "She is the daughter of Zumag, the village chief," came the reply. This did not simplify things, but Pierre Gerbalat had just made a decision. "I will take her as my wife," he announced. "Unfortunately, sir, that will not be possible. Felix Ebu, the governor of Kwango province, has already spoken for her," his companion answered. The situation was explained. The girl was too young to marry, she was only 13. Governor Ebu had agreed to wait until he returned from a leave in France before she became his bride. It was the custom at that time for an administrator to have an extended leave every 2 years. Felix Ebu was the first black man entrusted by the French with such a high position as the governorship of a province. His situation with the French administration was entirely unique. During the succeeding days, the image of the young girl with the dazzling smile haunted Pierre Gerbalat. He continued to make inquiries about her. According to African tradition, a bride was obtained by offering the family a dowry that reflected the value of the girl to her husband, as well as his financial status. How big was the dowry, Pierre Gerbalat asked, that Governor Ebu offered for her? It was, he was assured, a handsome one. Felix Ebu was already well known to Zumag's family. He had taken as wife one of Josephine's aunts, by whom he had had 2 children. It was not uncommon for an administrator to have more than one African wife, even from the same family. But Pierre Gerbalat was a determined man. He persisted where others might have given up. He was also, as a salaried representative of the Interfina Company, a wealthy one by African standards. He opened discussions with the chief on the dowry of Josephine. Finally he offered to double that which Felix Ebu had offered. This represented not only an irresistible sum in terms of village life, but strong proof of the white man's sincerity, as well. At last the family yielded and the marriage was arranged. In addition to this large dowry, Pierre Gerbalat was also obliged to present the many members of the family with gifts. For the women there were cooking pots, large enamel basins, and many meters of cotton cloth. He agreed to give trousers to all the men. So taken with Josephine was Pierre Gerbalat that he willingly acceded to all these demands. On the day Josephine was to be married, she was bathed several times, her body perfumed with the fragrant bark of a tree that is boiled, with its roots, into a highly prized, perfumed solution. Her body was rubbed with a peanut oil, almost red, which we call Angola. This is one of the most frequently used beauty products of our women. There was no ceremonial exchanging of vows, as there is for a Western couple. The rituals of the occasion were those performed by the matrons, the most respected women of the village. They presided over the bathing and anointing of Josephine, and instructed her to be docile with her husband. She was counseled to obey his every wish and to respond to these wishes, not with words, but by inclining her head. At last she was, to their satisfaction, ready. Solemnly the matrons walked her to the hut where Pierre Gerbalat was waiting for her. There they delivered her, with a few words, to the man who would make a woman of her. The following morning, at the first cock's crow, the chief matron returned to the nuptial hut to ask for proof of the bride's virginity. She was shown the cloth that had been on their bed. Satisfied that the bride had been a virgin and now was no more, the matrons stood before the hut and announced the news with a ululating call that sounded joyfully through the village. This meant that a celebration was in order and the work for the wedding feast could begin. It was time to cut the throats of the sheep, the cattle, and the pigs. One way or another, everyone in the village took part in the preparations. Since Gerbalat was such a personage, and the most prosperous colonial the villagers had seen, the feast was the most extravagant ever held. Most of the day and the night the people of the village ate and danced. Although she was supposed to play the part of the demure bride, watching the festivities from her place of honor with her husband, Josephine constantly forgot herself and escaped from Gerbalat's side to dance with the others. She could not resist the rhythm of those insistent drums. Even at such a traditional occasion this child woman manifested the charming spontaneity and willfulness that were to characterize her very special life. Soon after the wedding Pierre Gerbalat gave Josephine a fine horse and she learned to ride. Sometimes she accompanied him on short trips to nearby villages. More than ever this young girl who was married to a white man gathered distinction in the eyes of her people. My father was not disappointed in his bride. Although she was still a child, she was made to love, made to please. Pierre Gerbalat found her entrancing. She was so lively, so innocent, so young. She gave this colonial hunter and entrepreneur much pleasure. Josephine was of a heedless, happy-go-lucky nature. In the months that followed her marriage she hardly noticed that changes were taking place in her body, changes that signaled that she was to become a young mother. To her dismay, she began to vomit frequently. While traveling in his work one day Pierre Gerbalat had an accident with his car. The gasoline caught fire and his arm was deeply burned. The burn did not heal as it should have, became infected, and had to be treated. It was given to Josephine to change the bandages for her husband. But when she removed the gauze pack, the sight of the suppurating, open wound turned her stomach and made her ill. This happened several times. One day my father, never a patient man, exasperated by her vomiting, hit her. Josephine was unable to explain to him what the problem was, because she had no idea of her own condition. Finally, Pierre Gerbalat realized that something was in fact wrong with this once gay girl. At Bessu the nuns of the Order of St. Joseph of Cluny had recently established the mission of the Holy Family to which was attached a very simple clinic. He took Josephine to be examined there. The sisters informed him that his young bride was to have a child. My father was astonished. It had not occurred to him that such a thing would happen with this frail girl, in the short time he had known her. Pierre Gerbalat's relations with Josephine then changed. He became more thoughtful of her and gave her good care. He often took her to the Holy Family Mission so that she could receive medical attention. Josephine was extremely fond of her full sister, Augustine Sunda. One of their great pleasures was to bathe together in a stream. My father enjoyed watching the two girls. Curious and amused, he would sit on the bank observing them as they splashed and played, the water running over their young black bodies. Josephine touched her growing abdomen more in wonder than concern with the phenomenon that was taking place within her. Augustine had been taken as wife by the administrator of Chemo, whose name was Pajad. At the time he was away in France on his leave. From the bank, my father, referring to Josephine's now obvious pregnancy, would call out teasingly, "Josephine, it is clear, has her husband near her. But Augustine is all alone, her husband is gone." And the two girls would laugh with him. It was in a life of such simple pleasures that Josephine awaited her child. The nuns warned Pierre Gerbalat that Josephine's delivery would be difficult, even dangerous for her because she was so young and the baby was very large. Although her parents wanted Josephine to remain with them in the village, Pierre Gerbalat insisted that she should be where she could get special care, if necessary. He feared that the delivery would not be successful for both mother and child if left to traditional practices. When her term drew near, he took Josephine to the nuns and she stayed with them at the mission. One night there was an extraordinary moon. As was the custom for such nights, the Africans held a tam-tam dance. Since her marriage, Josephine had not been allowed to dance the sacred lingue. They had removed all the tiny pearls and shaved her head, as she had lost her status as the village sacred dancer. Now, on this evening of extraordinary moonlight, when she could not resist the call of the tam-tam, she slipped away from the mission to dance. In spite of the great weight in her abdomen, she joined the other women of the village. For hours they sang and danced in large circles around the drums, and Josephine, joyous with the rhythms of her people, danced with them. There she was taken with the first pains of childbirth. One might say I was called forth by the moon and the African drums. Josephine's delivery at the mission was long and harrowing. Finally, at the moment when her child came into the world, she fainted. Thus, while answering ancestral rites, I was delivered, prophetically, into the hands of the European nuns. In this way I began my life. My father was away at the time, making his rounds into the brush for the Interfina Company, with his merchandise on mules and horses. Each time he arrived in a village he sent a foot messenger back to the mission to tell the nuns where he was so that he could be advised when the delivery took place. Thus they knew where to send him the word, "It's a girl." Since travel on water was quicker than through the brush, my father took a pirogue and returned on the river to the mission, where he found me. It was his idea to give me the name of Andrée. My mother wanted to call me Madeline, so I was baptized with both names. However, my mother's people, instead of saying Madeline, called me Mandarin, a nickname that I have kept with them to this day. Footnote: Mandarin has two meanings to the French. It is a tangerine, and it is also a member of an intellectual elite. End footnote. I wasn't given an African name, although my father had known that it was the custom of the village people to give a white man a name appropriate to something about his person. In my father's case, it pertained to his business. Among the articles that he sold were jishi or little metal discs so highly prized by the African women. They wore them strung together, hundreds and hundreds of them, around the hips and neck, jangling against their bare bodies as they walked, with great effect. The jishi were a form of wealth, and the most beautiful women wore many strands of them in a maddening voluptuosity. When the women asked to buy jishi from my father, he had not yet learned to speak the Sango of our village, so he used a word from the dialect he spoke in the Congo. He would say, Kani, can't, which meant, there aren't any, I have none. So the people began to call him Jishikani, and the name stuck. It made them laugh, they found it charming, and for them from then on he was not Gerbalat but Jishikani. Josephine was so exhausted from the delivery that she could not be moved for some time. My father asked the nuns to keep her for 2 weeks, although most mothers went home sooner. Because she was so young and frail, she did not have milk for me. As was the custom among our people, my grandmother remained with my mother at the mission, cooking and caring for her. My grandmother was a very beautiful woman, extremely tall. She was given the name of Mimavata, which means, the goddess of water, because she was greatly respected and because she was from a family of fishers. She had the supernatural gift of clairvoyance, and there were many extraordinary stories of predictions she made that came true. Was she chilled, I wonder, by what she foresaw and suffering ahead for her daughter, and this new baby girl, the color of café au lait? At last Josephine was strong enough to travel, and my father came and took the 3 of us home, on the pirogue, to our village in the Congo. When my father made my mother his wife in an African ceremony, he was actually engaged already to Henriette Poussart, a woman 20 years younger than himself who lived in Belgium. He had met her during one of his leaves in Europe. If my father had been free, I like to think that he would have legitimized me, although it was in fact rare for Europeans to legitimize the children of their black liaisons. My father continued to make his rounds, selling and buying in the far, small villages of the country. My mother could not accompany him with her young baby, so she stayed with her mother in the village. He provided the minimum necessary for Josephine to live in the style of her people, and she was content to wait for him to visit her when he could. I am sure my father adored my mother. How could it have been otherwise with this charming, innocent child wife, for whom he knew he was responsible? But in spite of all his affection for her, he was unable to fulfill his responsibilities toward Josephine. A year after my birth, Henriette decided to come to Africa to be married. She arrived in December of 1922, and the marriage was celebrated in Bangui. Still, Pierre Gerbalat could not forget Josephine, and he found many pretexts to come to the village where she lived. He built a house for her there so that he could live with her and me while he was making his trips. Certainly this was proof that he still cared for her. Henriette knew about Josephine, and about my birth. She accepted the fact that her husband had had a child, but she had no intention of being encumbered by my presence, and she and Josephine detested one another. When Josephine learned that her man had taken a white wife, she was terribly wounded. As she was an entirely natural person, she expressed the way she felt fully. She made some terrible scenes with Henriette. Furiously she shouted at her, "Who are you, anyhow? You have no child, what are you to him? You have nothing. But I have this child, which I made with him. I am his real wife." She had other suggestions. "Why don't you leave? Why don't you go back where you came from? That would be better. You have no reason to stay here." These things, shouted in front of my father, were Josephine's means of trying to prove to him that he belonged more to us than to this other woman. They were a pathetic form of blackmail, to try to convince him to stay with us in the village. In Africa, mothers carry their babies in a sling on their backs, and thus I was content, head bobbing, my cheek against the shoulder of my mother or one of my aunts. Because a child is so loved in our country, I certainly had a happy infancy. I grew fat and strong, without any idea of the contradictions in which my life had been formed, contradictions that would shape for me a terrible future. The hut that my father built for my mother was of straw, as was the custom, but because a white man was to live there, it was a bit more elegant than the common hut. In our country the villages are built close to the rivers. The house of the chief is the farthest from the river, and all the others are built in a semicircle radiating out from it, so that the chief has a complete view through the center of the village toward the river. Each morning our pirogues went out on the Shari to fish, and in the evening their catch was divided among the people by the chief. When it was time for the boats to return, my grandfather, Zumag, who, as was the custom for a chief, was known by one name only, would take his place near the river. The catch was deposited before him and he then distributed the fish according to need, to everyone in the village, or people from the surrounding villages who presented themselves. No one paid. It was a truly socialistic sharing of the wealth. The pirogues belonged to the people of the village, but they were managed by the chief. The ways of an African village are beautiful. It has a soul, an African village. In the forests there are wild fruit trees with more fruit than can be gathered, but there are also fruit trees that have been planted and cultivated, usually near the village. Not far away, game can be found. With the hunting, fishing, and crops, an African village is very rich in its resources. One never dies of hunger there. And the bounty is for everyone in the village, which lives as a community. It was there, in this atmosphere of sharing, that I grew up. I think I must have been happy, madly happy, quite unaware of the specialness of my fate. I grew up with the other children. I took my first steps in the Congo, land of my ancestors. My father and Henriette prepared to go to France for their vacation, as was the custom. It was decided then that I should not be left in the village with my mother. My father learned that an orphanage for girls of mixed blood had recently opened its doors in Brazzaville. There, white men who did not know what to do with the offspring of their black liaisons were depositing their children. Just the thing for me. They could drop me off as they went through Brazzaville on the way to France. I was then barely 3 years old. Preparations were made for our departure. We were to sail down the Ubangui River to the Congo. My father came to the village, and over my mother's anguished protests, took me away. Josephine could not stop my father from doing this, but she could not accept it either. On the day the boat was to leave, dressed in her most beautiful pain, she came to the wharf to try to find us. All is noisy confusion before the departure of a river steamer, and it must have been difficult for her, a small, slender woman of 17 years, trying to push her way through the crowd. Cotton was being loaded onto the boat, and black stripped to the waist and carrying the great white bales jostled her. Porters shouted at her to move aside. Desperately Josephine searched everywhere for us, like a lioness, still fighting for her child. Suddenly she saw my father and Henriette on the ship. They were standing on the upper bridge, which was reserved for whites. Josephine knew that she could not set foot there, although it was her daughter they were taking away. What a scene she made then! With all her might she shouted up at Henriette, "That's my daughter you're stealing, mine. Give her back to me. You're a thief, a thief. You can't have my child." It was Henriette whom she blamed, not my father. She loved my father too much to think that he could do wrong. Her wrath was focused on the white woman who had taken first her man and now her child. Poor black woman, there was nothing she could do to alter the course of events. She had no rights over her own little daughter. The siren drowned Josephine's voice and the boat slid away from the wharf, leaving in its wake a woman in tears. Thus my mother disappeared from my life before I was old enough to store away the memory of her face. I was too young, then, to keep the sweet warmth of her tenderness for later comfort. The existence of the orphanage in Brazzaville was proof that the racism on which colonialism was built had failed. It was necessary, of course, to conceal this failure. The cover-up, the facade with which this was done was known as charity. In truth, the orphanage served as a kind of waste bin for the waste products of this black and white society, the children of mixed blood who fit nowhere. I did not have my father's name, so when I was registered there I was given a number 22. 21 other girls had been abandoned there before me. The institution in which I was to spend the next 14 long years was run by the Sisters of the Order of St. Joseph of Cluny. It was also referred to by the people of Brazzaville as the convent. In addition to the girls of mixed blood, there were several dozen girls whose parents were both black. However, these girls were kept apart from us. They were lodged in a building 200 meters from ours. Most of these black girls belonged to the Mukongo and Lari peoples. They, in turn, were separated from the Lingalas of the northern Congo. Our first lesson from the sisters, thus, was one of racial discrimination. We girls of mixed blood, the métisses, were taught that we were to have absolutely nothing to do with the black girls. As for white people, we were taught that they were a superior and infallible race. The orphanage had little contact with them except through what was respectfully known as the Charitable Committee of Good Works. For its food supplies, the institution depended almost entirely on gifts from the Portuguese businessmen of Brazzaville. Their donations consisted of white beans and split peas that contained weevils, salted fish that had been crushed or damaged, unmarketable smoked meat, chikwang, and manioc. The generous merchants also gave us sardines and corned beef in cans that were swollen like putrefied fish. When the cans were opened, a powerful, nauseating spray shot forth. The building in which we girls of mixed blood were lodged was made of clay bricks, which had been crudely baked and so melted when it rained. The roof was of corrugated iron. There were a dozen large rooms in this immense building, including an infirmary and a gloomy parlor called the St. Mary and St. Joseph Room, where marriages were arranged. The 3 dormitories were rigorously divided into age groups, one for the small girls, where I first slept, one for the girls up to the age of puberty, and one for the older girls, in the middle of which was a bedroom for 3 guardian nuns. There was also a classroom big enough for the 65 girls, which we were one day to have, but there were very few benches or desks and almost no books. The largest room was used for sewing. An important part of our instruction was sewing and embroidery, as our work was the chief source of revenue for this community of nuns. In the dining hall we sat at long rows of bare wooden tables. There, twice a day, we ate with our fingers the vile food that was given to us. The sister who supervised us was enthroned on a sort of pulpit from which she could see everything, like the guard of a chain gang. It was her duty to see that we did not talk during meals. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a ladle touching enamel dishes. Silently we entered the hall and stood at our places, our eyes fixed on the nun until she gave the ritual clap, the signal that we could be seated. After chanting a grace in which we thanked God for his protection and for what we were about to eat, we were at last free to gulp down, if we could, the nauseating food on our plates. However, it often made us ill and we vomited what we ate. Hunger was a constant companion, pinching our insides so cruelly that we filled ourselves with water to cheat it. The nun who surveyed us of course did not eat our contaminated food. Like the other sisters, she ate in the nuns' dining hall, which was 100 meters away from ours. Tormentingly delicious odors came to us from their building and we tried to imagine the wonderful foods that made up their meals, which we had never tasted. We each slept in an iron bed, on a bare mattress, rolled up in a single coverlet. There was no mosquito netting. Every night we were devoured not only by mosquitoes but by the bedbugs that swarmed in our beds. Twice a year, I remember, these infested iron beds were stacked on top of one another in the big courtyard of the orphanage and a great fire of straw was lit under them. This fire gave us much joy. The crackling flames not only warmed our hearts but promised us a good sleep for a week or 2. Soon after that, the bedbugs, which were hidden in the cracks of the clay walls, would be back to bite us again. At the end of the courtyard was a little garden where sorrel, sweet potato tes, and manioc grew. The earth there was enriched with a natural fertilizer, as I well knew, for each morning we dug holes there and emptied the 15 toilet receptacles of the orphanage. The grounds were enclosed by walls 3 meters high bristling with the shards of bottles. We girls never doubted for a moment that those walls were not to keep trespassers out, but to keep us in. Life beyond those detestable walls, we thought, must be marvelous. We dreamed of the day when somehow, by some unimaginable stroke of good luck, we would be set free. At times when the nuns were not around, my friends and I would climb the guava trees that grew over the wall and greedily watch what was happening in the street below. We called it the Street of Paradise. Our instruction in the orphanage, besides embroidery and such sewing as darning and mending, was mainly catechism and the liturgical chants in Latin, which we learned by sound, without understanding a word. Day after day we embroidered the linens, we chanted the masses, and gave thanks for the vile food set before us without any happiness or hope. In our muslin uniforms we were brown-skinned, well-oiled robots, docile, disciplined, totally submissive. What else could we be, abandoned as we were, without an official identity under the most ignoble laws? Who had given us any consideration until then? Who cared if we lived or died? The only reality in our youths was our hunger. It obsessed us. Discipline in the orphanage was as severe as that of a penitentiary. The slightest fault was punished with a whipping. But even this, sometimes, was considered insufficient. I was only 4 years old when I experienced the full cruelty of a nun's chastisement. It was provoked by this incident. I was playing in the recreation courtyard with Gaston, a young boy of mixed blood of my own age. He was the only boy admitted to this institution for girls, because he was the son of one of the African servants. We had been playing our childish games for some time when I was taken with one of nature's calls, and, as small African children do, I began removing my panties, which buttoned in back, to take care of it on the spot. When my panties got tangled around my legs, Gaston tried to help me. One of the guardian nuns witnessed this and rushed over to us. She slapped each of us hard, shouting, "You have committed a terrible sin." Sin. Every day I heard that word without knowing what it meant. At last I was getting an idea of what sin was. As a punishment, Gaston and I were made to kneel for 1 hour at the foot of St. Joseph's statue, in the heat of the midday sun, our hands on our heads. But that was only the beginning. Then the nuns shut us up in the woodyard, which was inhabited by enormous dark rats. We were terrified. Never have I suffered more. It was not until night that they came to release us and send us to bed without supper. Still our penance had not ended. The next morning at the 6 o'clock Mass, Gaston and I were made to kneel on the flagstones in the center of the chapel, objects of shame before the rest of the institution. After the service, we had to make the Stations of the Cross, also on our knees. Our sin, we were told, was a mortal one, and the penalty was hell. To make sure we understood what was ahead for us, we were shown a picture of hell. In this picture, angels delivered sinners to Satan, who pushed them into flames filled with serpents. The angels were white, Satan was black. Desperately I pled with the Mother Superior, begging her with all my might to believe in our innocence. At the end I actually fainted with terror. I had been condemned to the flames for getting my legs caught in my panties. And poor Gaston, who had only wished to help me untangle them. I tried to comfort him by telling him that he would probably only be sent to purgatory, since the fault was mostly mine. It was 4 years later that my eyes were opened to the fact that black people suffered because they were black. Until then I had thought that the suffering that was the lot of my companions and myself was special to ourselves. It was due to the fact that we were illegitimate, that we were of mixed blood, and that we had been consigned to the convent. Outside, on the other side of those iron gates, I felt sure, was a world of freedom and happiness. The people who passed on our street of paradise could fill their stomachs with good food and feast their eyes on the faces of the ones they loved every day. It was my on 8th birthday that the shocking truth about the black people outside our walls came to me. I shall never forget how it happened, exactly at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Already that morning there had been something strange in the air. I had sensed a feverishness among the nuns, although they ceased whispering and put on severe faces whenever one of us girls came near. Then, at the hour of vespers we were walking, as was our custom, 2 by 2, toward the chapel. Suddenly the quiet was broken by a long scream. Many years have passed since then, but I can still remember how that scream pierced the warm air and made us shiver. Only an inhuman suffering could have wrenched it from a human throat. A moment later, other cries, equally terrible, were raised. Not one, but a number of men were sharing the same dreadful fate. I thought my heart would stop beating. To reach the chapel we had to cross a central walk that ended at the great portal of the orphanage, a wrought iron gate always kept closed with a chain and an enormous padlock. Through the bars of the gate at the far end of the walk we could see into the street. There, chained to one another, their wrists tied behind their backs, men were being driven by black guards, wielding chicats. Hardly 20 meters separated us from this pitiful procession. We could see long trickles of blood streaking the prisoners' black skin. The wretches seemed to be naked. In a terrified reflex of my training I crossed myself and asked God to have pity on them. The nuns hurried us on, pushing us into the chapel, where a harmonium was already thundering as for a high mass. This was a calculated attempt to drown out the cries now coming regularly from the street. It failed, however, and the desperate, piercing shrieks continued, sounding over the liturgical chants in a din that seemed all the more unbearable. The prisoners continued to stream past our high walls by the dozens, by the hundreds. Louder than the canticles, the terrible chorus of their cries, answered by the abuse of their chain gang guards, filled our ears. Following the men were their wailing mothers, wives, and children. At times we could make out the words which the prisoners shouted over and over, like a litany, "We want to be French citizens. We want to be French citizens."
Katherine Massey Book Club, we want to be French citizens. Nahel M., he said the same thing, didn't he? Matter of fact, all of the black sisters and black brothers that they gave the boot called them bête noirs. Beat it, beat it, beat it. Arrivederci. Wait a minute. How you said, au revoir. That's it for French. Au revoir. Noir. Au revoir. We got Olympic Games. We're trying to see Bron James, Steph Curry hit these threes. Man, Wemby. We ain't got time for these black brothers and sisters coming in. We want to be French citizens. Beat it, beat it, beat it. We just talked about that, man. Black French. Get out of here, man. Katherine Massey Book Club. Definitely can't remember where we left off at. French citizens. Nahel M. Andrée Blouin. I read a little bit of this book when I got out of the theater. Soundtrack to a coup d'etat, coming to theater soon. I was stunned. They didn't even read all of the stuff that we just read. None of that is read in the movie. They focus on the part that's at the end of this book when white people come to kill Lumumba, everybody that they think he's cool with, including Miss Blouin. That's the part that they read from, but that's way down the road. Interesting tidbit. Did folks catch that? She said she was born in 1921. That is exactly 8 years before the birth of Neely Fuller Jr. Just kind of putting in context. She's, kind of pretty much same age group. He's 1929, she's 1921. 8-year difference, right? Unless my math is wrong. Number again, let's try those numbers. The number 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Excuse me, 564-943-pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. If you have any issues dialing in, I did today, feel free to use the free HD app, the VOP line, excuse me. You can download this. You can access this online, free VOP line. You'll see it works. You'll see it if you download the app for your phone, or you can even use the web-based version. You don't have to download anything. You can use the web-based version on whichever browser you use, and very simple. It works. The interface will look just like your phone dial pad. So you can dial the number I just gave out, 605-313-5164, and then put in the same code, 564-943-pound. And you should be able to dial it. You can communicate, talk, all that. Press star 61, put your hand up if you want to, and all that good stuff. If you have any interference or difficulties trying to dial in live, usual suspects. Anywho, we'll be here every day between now and Sunday. More details on that to come. We'll see if folks have commentary on the first portion of the book. I'm not sure how widely available this book is in terms of, like, if you go to the public library and all that. I actually get the impression this is one of those books that white people did not want us to read. And given the first, we didn't even get through all the way through the first chapter. I can see why this would be a book white people would not want us to read. That notwithstanding, let's see. Folks who dialed in, they have commentary on the first portion of the reading. Let's see. Lauren should be with us. If you have commentary, proceed.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So I think what I really noticed was her white progenitor and the way he chose the mother. So it said, even today, the story of my father and my mother, while giving me much pain, astonishes me still. How did it happen that this 40-year-old man from an exceptionally bourgeois and traditional background should find himself captivated by a 13-year-old girl of a remote and primitive village? I just think maybe that's because white people don't really care about children. They want to have sex with them. Lots of them participate in pedophilia. I think that's how that worked out. Let me see. Then when she gets pregnant, he hits her for throwing up, and then hold on. He acted like, I'm really trying to find the part. I did some highlights, but let me see. Oh. And this part right here, I will read this. There they delivered her with a few words to the man who would make a woman of her. This white man, I hesitate to call him a father, but this white man did not make a woman of her mother. Her mother was a girl, and she was in a pitiful situation, and that was shown by the way she was treated, by the way her daughter was able to be taken from her. And when she gets pregnant, he says, he took her to the doctor or to the nuns or whatever, and he said, my father was astonished. It had not occurred to him that such a thing would happen with this frail girl in the short time he had known her. Now, this white man knows he was having sex with this child, and I think he knows how children are produced. I doubt he was that astonished. I mean, that is just ridiculous. Let me see. I thought it was interesting that she said her mother's people, instead of saying Madeline, called me Mandarin, a nickname that I have kept with them to this day. And it said that there's two meanings for Mandarin in French. One is tangerine, and also it's a member of an intellectual elite. I thought that was interesting because she seemed to be intellectual. The way I don't know what to call him. Maybe I should just call him by his name. But the so-called white father, he goes and marries a white woman, and that's the real wife. And it said, if my father had been free, I'd like to think that he would have legitimized me, although it was in fact rare for Europeans to legitimize the children of their black liaisons. I don't even know what that means. How could she be legitimized? And her father was free. I mean, he could do whatever he wanted. That's being proven. Let me see. Oh, and the book actually called it pathetic. It said, when Josephine learned that her man had taken a white wife, she was terribly wounded. As she was an entirely natural person, she expressed the way she felt fully. She made some terrible scenes with Henriette. Furiously, she shouted at her, "Who are you anyhow? You have no child. Who are you to him? You have nothing. But I have this child, which I made with him. I am his real wife." Again, I don't think these things are true. She produced this child, but she doesn't really have it, and that was shown by the child being taken away. And that white lady is much more powerful than she is. I think she does have something, at least power. And the book says they were a pathetic form of blackmail to try to convince him to stay with us in the village. Let me see. I was unfamiliar with the word. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but pirogues, Pirogues. That's a boat, a small boat. I guess that was used for fishing. And I thought it was interesting that the mom, the black mother, she blamed the white woman. It was Henriette whom she blamed, not my father. She loved my father too much to think that he could do wrong. Her wrath was focused on the white woman who had taken first her man and now her child. Poor black woman, there was nothing she could do to alter the course of events. She had no rights over her own little daughter. I think that's accurate. They had a classroom that was big enough for 65 girls. It said there were very few benches or desks and almost no books. All the talk about food and hunger, we have encountered that in several books. The basketball player, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, was in there. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Vincent E. Woodard's book, that was a big part of it. Medical apartheid, that was a big part of it. Just hunger is a constant part of people classified as black. It's a constant part of our lives, I think, collectively. She said the only reality in our lives was our hunger. It obsessed us. And I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Delectable Negro, Vincent Woodard. I don't know. Given what we've heard, is Andrea, that's how I'm saying it because the accent is over the first E. She has Andree, and there's an accent over the first E, so I think that's how you say it. That might not be the case. And I'm certainly not French or informed about linguistics on the continent, so hey, I could be totally wrong. Anywho, given what we've heard so far, though, she is not classified as black, right?
In this part of the world, she would be classified as black. I don't really care what white people call her, whether they call her colored or whatever. She's non-white, and I think she is classified as black. Maybe they don't call it that over there, but I think that's racial classification confusion.
Could be, certainly. They just pointing out they did make that distinction in the book. Like, she's not even supposed to be hanging out with people that are classified as black. Anyhoodles, Delectable Negro, Vincent Woodard. We did read that one of the favorites. Let's see. Other folks, *61 if you have commentary. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Folks who wrote in with commentary. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, and callers. Interested to read this text. Could find next to nothing about this text on the internet, which makes it all the more intriguing. As I said, I think this is one of those books that white people did not want non-white people, victims of racism, to read. I think this is one of those books like, whoa, get out of it. Like, they talk about all that book burning and suppression of literature and all that. Like, this title seems incorrect since Africa is a continent, not a country. Maybe that'll be explained. A common misnomer, maybe? I think it was on purpose. Please keep us informed when and where we can stream soundtrack to a coup d'etat. It should be coming soon, in a matter of months, to U.S. audiences, and I think it's going to be released internationally sooner. This is not a U.S. Film, the filmmakers, so it'll be released internationally sooner. So if you are, informed about using the internet to find movies in advance, you might be able to find it early. It would definitely be worth it. Although I would say everything about this movie, it is worth seeing it on the big screen. It is so a global system of racism, right? That's what this film really emphasizes, that it was not just white people in one location. It was white people from all over the world who orchestrated the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. It's so large in scope, and just to see Minister Malcolm X on a, not Denzel Washington or somebody else playing him, to see Minister Malcolm X big on the screen, it leaves, and then also you will get to hear them read. You'll get to see the author, Andrée Blouin, and you get to hear them read the very book that we are reading. You get to hear them read from it repeatedly throughout the film. It's breathtaking. Chapter 1. How did it happen that this 40-year-old man from an exceptionally bourgeois and traditional background should find himself captivated by a 13-year-old of a remote and primitive village? Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings. Really, I was thinking Strom Thurmond. Didn't we read Dear Senator Essie Mae Washington Williams? I had that in my head so many times, but yeah, it's a lot of those you could pick. My cow bell. 2. Pierre Gibrault, opened discussions with the chief on the dowry of Josephine. Finally, he offered to double that which Felix Ibui had offered. Slavery by another name. That's another one. Douglas Blackman, former Cow's guest as well. 3. More than ever, this young girl who was married to a white man gathered distinction in the eyes of her people. The trashing of our brains by racist white supremacists is global, and that has been the case for such a long time. You get prestige for being married to a white person. Or you'll have such pretty babies, which is the same thing. So prestigious. Ooh. Really, maybe, hopefully you won't be mistreated, which is goofy, but everybody said trashed, brain trashed. 4. If my father had been free, I like to think that he would have legitimized me, although it was in fact rare for Europeans to legitimize the children of their black liaisons. He built a house for her there so that he could live with her and me while he was making his trips. Certainly this was proof that he still cared for her. The confusion of tragic arrangements inflicted on the offspring is a recurrent theme on the cows, hasn't it been? Essie Mae Washington Williams, dear Senator, I'm just picking one, but one from the book club. Interestingly, that term liaison, she doesn't call this rape. Just her putting the ages on it alone, I would have a hard time. This could be my bestest buddy in the whole wide world. We do everything together. I mean, we kick it tough. If he was 40 and had a child messing around with having sexual intercourse with a 13-year-old, my closest buddy in the whole wide world, whoa, whoa, that would be a rough one to like, we gonna still be buddies, like, woo, oh, this just a liaison, Brother Gus, like, ooh, woo. That's what I'm supposed to call this? Like, yeah, my buddy, black brother, his 13-year-old liaison. Ooh, I couldn't even come on here and say, ooh. I'd be waiting for somebody. What you mean? Liaison? Yeah. I'm a mute, and you right. Like, what? What? It stood out to me because she kept using that word liaison. I said, what? So I look up liaison. Now I skipped through the first few definitions because they just further confused me. Like, what? You get all the way down to 1A, sexual relationship, especially one that is secret and involves unfaithfulness to a partner. Perfect. Now, I would not have been thinking that's what a liaison is. Wow. Perfect. But I mean, even still, nope. That is not perfect. Sorry. That does fit a little bit better, but nope, because it said it involves unfaithful. This is not no sexual relationship. This is child rape, and there's nothing else. There's no other term. The only term for that, even with, never mind, let me get back to the read. Child rape. Just stagnant. If this was, even if this was a grown so-called, if this was a 40-year-old Congolese female, nope, still, because she would have to be able to say no. The fact that it's a 13-year-old, like, oh my God, my. Jerry Sandusky through and through. Jeffrey Epstein, just keep rolling them out. Let's see. 4. Oh, we just read that 4. Father been 3, liaison, blah, blah. 5. It was truly a so in free, white, and 40. They say free, white, and 21. How in the world is a 40-year-old white man not free during the middle of the night? It could be 2024, really, but how is he not so-called free? Come on now. 5. It was a truly socialistic sharing of the wealth. I am a little suspicious of using racist white supremacist constructs when describing non-white social systems, particularly since terms such as socialist are not consistently defined. Remember that socialist man that we heard? Never mind. 6. The existence of the orphanage in Brazzaville was proof that the racism on which colonialism was built had failed. I did not have my father's name, so when I was registered there, I was given a number 22. I thought they said that's catch 22. Anyway, that's a different book. Failed, F-A-I-L-E-D, this does not seem like an accurate statement. Is the explanation for this, her father would rather leave her in horrible conditions as opposed to letting the white part of his precious bloodline be raised by those savages? White people are just wired differently. White people do not care about children, thus even the existence of the orphanage. Incidentally, when I read that, we have read that so many times where white people have to make dumping grounds, and white people like J. Strom Thurmond, Thomas Jefferson, they have to make dumping grounds. They just talked about this with the Vietnam babies, where they have to make dumping grounds for all of the children that are products of white people raping non-white people all over the world. And failed, it's not failed. If anything, this is evidence of the spectacular success we can. How did I forget in the midst of this? The whole world as the white man's brothel. That's a book chapter, The East, the West, and Sex. Richard Bernstein, guest on the Cows, 2009. How is that failure? I can walk around here and rape your children, rape your mother, rape your son, whole family, make you watch, make a video of it. There's nothing you can do about it. It might even be that sort of thing, nothing you can even say. I better not hear you act like you got a complaint about me raping your mother and your little sister who's 12. You better not act like you're upset about this. How was that a failure? We do not understand just confusion. The sexual intercourse, we talked about that, man, turns the brain computer to rot. Can't see what is right there, what you are looking at. And the ages alone would be enough to shut everything down. 40, 13, and I know you got different cultures. 40, 13. Seven. Like putrefied fish, when the cans were opened, a powerful, nauseating spray shot forth. Hunger was a constant companion. The nun who surveyed us, of course, did not eat our contaminated food, mosquitoes, but the bed bugs. And these psychopaths think of themselves as pious Christians, the religion of white supremacy mixed in with a little delectable Negro. Lots of delectable Negro. Let's see. Gaston, a young boy of mixed blood, my own age. He was the only boy admitted to this institution for girls because he was a son of the African servants. I began removing my panties, enormous dark rats. Perhaps these nuns were living out their sadistic sexual fantasies through torturing these children, since repression of sexual urges is a part of their so-called faith. I don't know. In any event, it is just sickening. Haven't we heard this before, though? Half has never been told. I thought that was a point of emphasis, Edward Baptist, where he said, beating you for no reason. Beat you when you didn't even do anything. Well, you know you didn't do anything. You did exactly what we told you to do, and we still gonna beat you and get gratification. Get the chakota, however you say it. Get the do the cracking. We said that's not name calling. I'm a cracker. And that's in Delectable Negro, too. In fact, the bed bugs chomping on you. See, I can watch you be devoured while you don't even get anything to eat. That's in Delectable Negro, as well as the beatings. Because a lot of times, what I get to do, strip you nude, then beat you. Get to the rest as we proceed. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in, hand up, commentary to share first portion of My Country, Africa, which again, we'll have to see. Now, is that going to be explained? Is this a misnomer from someone born on the continent, or was this deliberate I think that is deliberate. I had forgotten. So the time period that she went through, that was a concept. Africa, I guess it would be doubles like Australia. Africa as a country and continent. I'm for sure put money down. That was deliberate, and that was a part of, oh my God, I totally forgot. That is a huge part of why Patrice Lumumba has got to go. Oh my God, we like tribal thinking niggers. Well, I don't like you and I don't like you. Yeah, you from over here. Not the country of Africa. And we're, for sure. Asterisk on that, and Gus putting big time money down. That was for sure on purpose and a part of why you've got to be killed. All of you, maybe. Let's see. Victim in New Jersey should be with us as well.
Hey, how you doing, Gus? Another African, non-white, Arab male, African leader was sodomized and killed, and also had a vision for a united Africa, Muammar Gaddafi. So, if I heard that correctly, did the black males, were they chanting, "You just want to be French"?
They said we want to be French citizens.
Okay, gotcha. Wow, just real interesting. Now, this book right here is coming at a perfect time, especially when you have all the back and forth on social media about, Black Americans and Africans. But once in a while, just being a spectator, as this book is, being read, and what came to mind was, when you stated it, you said slavery by another name. So, whether it's apartheid, similar to Jim Crow, slavery, colonialism, it's all the same. Christianity, and when I heard the nuns correcting the children and threatening them with punishment, not only in life, but also in death. So you are captured. Even your imagination about the afterlife is a white thought. But that was interesting. And even today, I, with no judgment at all, just I'm still learning, just knowing what I know. Today, to hear black people call themselves Christian, it still confuses me. But I think this book right here is a good pick, Gus. It's definitely needed with all the confusion, with all the division. And I think that, yes, 13, yeah, that's rape. That's rape. And just like with Thomas Jefferson, it's always just described in a way where it's consensual. Right now we have black males being arrested and charged for allegedly manipulating grown women into sexual acts. And to think that a 40 and 13-year-old relationship is described as a relationship and not rape. But again, like I said, I'm definitely gonna call in more on this book read. I think this book read about the going-ons in Africa in the past and can, and make the parallels to what's going on in the present is definitely needed today. So this I think this is going to be a very, very good book. I'll close.
Should be informative. I guess that's what I was thinking of, that because that's very common where you have individuals in this hemisphere, area of the world known as the U.S. specifically, non-white people who take a perspective, and victims guaranteed qualify, take a perspective that I was born in this part of the world, And, I'm going to focus on what's happened here. I'm not as concerned about things that happen with regards to racism in other parts of the world. I want to focus here. Victims guaranteed qualified, but it is a global system, and I do think we can learn a lot about what it means to be classified as white, just about the system in general, and hopefully some strategies to figure out how to neutralize all of this, and just seeing, oh wow, they do lots of the same things all over, and how they abuse and terrorize non-white people, even sexually raping non-white children. Jerry Sandusky, Jeffrey Epstein. Let's see. Get to some of my own notes. *61 if you have commentary to share. Much obliged, Lauren, victim in New Jersey. Let's see. And they say, it takes a village to raise a child. Chapter 1 is from the village to the orphanage. Horror story. It almost sounded like she was describing a prison, which she is. She said they lived behind thick bars, and they were taught an abiding sense of shame. I think that is the system of white supremacy through and through. You are supposed to be ashamed if you are classified as black, especially. If you are not white, for sure. Non-white people in general, they get, eye surgeries and all that, but especially if you are classified as black, shame, Negro. Let's see. Born out of wedlock. See, she doesn't even say the product of rape. Born out of wedlock. The white man's weakness for black women. 13 is not a woman. And it seems like it was a lot of lusting after black children. I'm sure some black boys in there as well. Accuracy with terms on this is very important. I have to see if they have pictures of the chicote to see exactly what this whip looks like, made of oxen. She was like, what in the world? Because they had pictures in The Half Has Never Been Told of some of the different torture devices that they used on black people. So they probably got museums with some of these chicotes saved, bronzed even. Let's see. She said she developed the courage to become active in the cause of her people only when I was able to transcend my black and white inheritance and become more than the stereotype of each, to become simply a woman, a human being. I thought that was interesting because the title of the book is My Country, Africa, Autobiography of the Black Pasionaria. I thought we transcended black and white. Let's see. As it says, she was born December 16, 1921, 8 years before Neely Fuller Jr. So they're kind of cohorts, kind of. Let's see. In the word guide, only one group qualifies for mom, dad. In fact, he says mother superior, father superior. Her white father, child rapist. This French white dude, he hunted elephants for their ivory, but that proved a chancy business. I was wondering, like, chancy because you might not have anyone to sell it to. You might miss the elephants. A lion might eat you while you're out shooting at the elephant. Like, what exactly makes it chancy? And then when I read that now, today, when they talk about, oh no, we got to save the elephants, on the continent. Oh my goodness. It's, they'll have an image of a poacher. It'll be some black person. Like, ooh, these bandits from Rwanda. Ooh, these are the worst dudes in the world, and we got to stop them, and Greenpeace is going to go in, and they're killing all the elephant. Let's see. Especially, there were so many times it was specifically Essie Mae Washington Williams, Dear Senator, where she's writing about her child raping white dad. I don't remember, did we call him something? I'm not asking for it. We can think about it. I don't remember, did we call him something other than dad? Child raping dad? Like, I don't remember. Anyway, but I thought of that so frequently because it was the same sort of emotional connection to this child raping white man. And remember she talked about wanting her dad and mom to be able to be in some of the bohemian spots of New York so they could just walk and hold hands and be a romantic couple. Like, what are you talking about? This is a child raping white man. Like, what? I don't know if you all remember that, but I remember it vividly. And there were many moments in that book that were just like that. And it sounded so many paragraphs in what we've read already reminded me of that. When she says, even today, the story of my father and mother, while giving me much pain, astonishes me still. How did it happen that this 40-year-old man from an exceptionally bourgeois and traditional background should find himself captivated by a 13-year-old? Oh, are you serious? There's one captive here. The 13-year-old. Oh, man. Let's see. So they come out to do the dance for this white man. He's Pierre Cabal. I bet they have pictures so we can see what he looks like online and such. He comes to watch these half-naked dancers who are probably lots of children and really young people. So he's already in ties. And he says among these dancers were the linguis, girls specially chosen and trained for whom the dance was a sacred rite. As he watched the linguis, he became intrigued by the form and manner of a very young girl. Tell me about it. She was small and slender with tiny pointed breasts and hundreds of pearls sewn through her hair. He found her beautiful, and when she smiled, I believe Pierre Gerbault trembled, for his life was never the same after that. We've heard that the people who mentioned Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, bingo. They will talk about it like this is a romance, and Thomas Jefferson, he just had that irresistible swagger, and he just sauntered on into the slave quarters, and he just gave Sally that eye. And she had that little teenage smile, as a 13-year-old would. And she tried to play it cool. Like, what in the hell are you talking about? It's child rape, period. There's nothing else to call this. Well, they had a thing for you. Get out of here, man. I got a thing for not being whipped with the chicote. I got a thing for you not stealing my children. I got a thing for not being beaten. Come on. Man, real talk. Wait until you hear that when Diddy goes on trial. Let me hear if that pops up. Hey. Don't be talking bad about Diddy. We had a thing. He cared. Certainly that should apply with a 40-year-old white man and a 13-year-old child. Christ. Let's see. It was not uncommon for a white administrator to have more than one African wife. This is not a wife, man. They rape a lot of people. Got it. Jerry Sandusky, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell. They rape a lot of people. Rape a lot of children, They rape a lot of children. They rape their people. They're people, but we want to emphasize. They rape a lot of children. Yes. Let's see. My father was not disappointed in his bride, although she was still a child. She was made to love, made to please. That's what I mean. Like, is that in the vows? Did they say that? Nowadays, you're going to be made. That sounds like force. It sounds like this is going to be some sort of oppressive regime. Is he made to do anything? Is Pierre going to be made to behave and not smack her upside the head? Come on, man. Let's see. He said Pierre's relations with Josephine then changed after she's pregnant. He became more thoughtful of her and gave her good care. He often took her to the Holy Family Mission so that she could receive medical attention. This is another one where I think frequently non-white people, we get confused into thinking that a white person maybe being slightly courteous to us or maybe not lashing us to death that particular day, that does not constitute good, in quotes, treatment. If he took her to the doctor, he might take a mule to I've seen plenty of white people do that. Take a mule to the doctor a horse to the doctor. I mean, whatever. That does not, he raped a child. Let's see. Oh my God. Oh my God. Josephine was extremely fond of her full sister Augustine Sunda. One of their great pleasures was to bathe together in a stream. My father enjoyed watching the two girls. I'm so glad we didn't get this called anything other than two girls. Curious and amused, he would sit on the bank observing them as they splashed and played, the water running over their young black bodies. Thank you, Miss Blouin, for sexualizing this. What in the world? Oh, if you rape a lot of, line it up my next victim, Jeff Dahmer. I just told you the chapter in the book. The whole world as the white man's brothel. Does that sound like a failure of racism? I can go out and watch black children bathe anytime I want to and then rape them anytime does that sound like, oh man, this colonialism thing just ain't gonna work out? Man, I wish we had done it better. Done it the right way. Let's see. One night there was an extraordinary moon. That was us this week, right? Did you all get to get outside and catch the festivities? Let's see. Her mom was so young. What young was she? She was so young and frail. She did not have milk for me. That's delectable Negro too, right? Let's see. And even it had been mentioned how tiny her breasts were. Duh, she's 13. Let's see. I'm sure my father adored my mother. How could it have been otherwise with this charming, innocent child wife? What is that? Is that like Woody Allen? Is that you get your child wife? What? Did they have a child husband for whom he knew he was responsible? Sound like you're talking about a child, not a wife. But in spite of all his affection for her, he was unable to fulfill his responsibility. Like, it's a child. I rape her, a nigger child. I rape her when I feel like it. I'm in town. I stop by. I leave her a few dollars, get her some Nikes. I dip. I go back to my white woman in Belgium. Probably got 15. She already said they would have many African children that they rape. So he probably got 15 of these spread out throughout that is his country. Whole planet, really. My brothel. Man. Because a child is so loved in our country, I certainly had a happy infancy. Man, you contrast that with the orphanage. Even contrast that with Annie. She's white in the orphanage. We didn't forget you, Devontae Hart. Not at all. Let's see. You already hit the word socialist. I didn't know what pierogies were either. The white men who did not know what to do with the offspring of their black liaisons were depositing their children. Like something about that sentence just, and I've heard that so many times. That's how you end up with HBCU. Dr. Wellesley even talked about that with John Boehner, like the white men raping black females on the plantation, and they send the offspring up north to Ohio. And that's how you have people that look like John Boehner, why he was teased and ridiculed about his skin complexion while he was in office. Racks and legions of this. What are we going to do? We didn't rape dogs and got all these little nigger guys. What are we going to do? And send them across town and all the rest of it. That's going to, Jesus. Dear Senator. Let's see. Even the blaming of the white woman. Hey, now white women do practice racism. Henriette for sure to blame. But I mean, how does the white man get absolved? He couldn't have stopped this? If he's so in love with her, if, as you say, if he has so much affection for her, oh man, she's really upset. That's my favorite side piece. Maybe we won't steal her. I can't even get my... Woo! And we've heard this so many times. It's so commonly tacky. Let's see. We get all this about the food, and they get the worst of the food with weevils in it and sardine cans that are about to burst because they're putrid and stink. And of course, the white nuns don't eat this food. They just hold their nose and walk by, and they probably get lobster flown in or whatever else during the time period. The food was so bad that it made them sick. I even felt like, dang, we heard that before as well. Like delectable, literally in the book, Delectable Negro. I think that's there, and a few other where they give the victuals that they give to the black people. They're about to starve and die. Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, they had to go out and steal off the fruit trees in Mississippi and such. Let's see. Poor sleep conditions. We've heard that one a lot too. What else could we be, abandoned as we were without an official identity under the most ignoble laws? Who had given us any consideration until then? Who cared if we lived or died? The only reality in our lives was our hunger. What? I don't even know what to say. I mean, that's such a staggering, Jesus, like, life unworthy of life. Wow. At the orphanage, no less. Which was like a penitentiary. Yeah, that's about what it sounds like over and over in this book. The angels were white, Satan was black. That's still the case today, of course. Religion of white supremacy. And then she talks about the procession of black dudes being beaten in front of her, and she asked God to have pity on them. We are still worthy of extraordinary pity. And still probably would not be French. They boot us. We'd be wimpy. They boot us to the suburbs of Paris. That's if we get lucky. They put us out in the outskirts like they did the black people they kicked out for the Olympics last month. That's about the best we could hope. Like French citizens, we got some day-old baguettes and a one-way bus ticket out of town. Au revoir. It'd be sad if it wasn't true. Did anybody, anything else before we conclude and get to the second audio segment?
I have something right at the beginning where it said all of us have been born out of wedlock. That doesn't make sense. I mean, if the white man Pierre is married to Josephine, how were they born out of wedlock?
Rape, I think, would be, but so if everybody here was white, that would not be an applicable term. If he was just catting around with another of age white woman and ended up getting her pregnant, that wouldn't be out of wedlock. He had an affair and produced a child. Is that the same thing? No.
I mean, he paid the whole dowry and everything. I mean, it was an African sort of marriage. It wasn't a white people marriage, but I don't know. And at the end there, when the black males were saying they wanted to be French citizens, I processed that as they wanted to be treated like white people. And that's all I have.
For sure. I don't think they actually wanted to go to France. I don't think. They just didn't want to be mistreated. Treated like white people. I think that's... Yeah.
Gus, if I can add, because she caller said that a diary was paid, and I mean, to use today's terms, tricking ain't easy. So people pay for sex all the time. So I'm pretty sure a white man come, oh, that's your customs, oh, that's the price, there you go, give me your 13-year-old wife. All right. So I don't even really think that was respected. Him putting money down for some sex. I mean, that's common in Western culture.
Doesn't get any better. That's what the whole world as the white man's brothel. Audio segment 2. Andrée Blouin's My Country, Africa. Katherine Massey Book Club.
What evil, we asked ourselves, did these simple words contain? Why were those who used them so cruelly treated? Nanette, one of my best friends, and older than I, slipped out of the chapel without being observed by any of the nuns. I followed her and we ran through the clumps of bushes in the garden to the gate. There we stood, gripping the bars, transfixed, watching the forbidden spectacle on the other side. In spite of the fact that they were being whipped, the prisoners continued to shout their demands. These men, I thought, were of the same race as our mothers. How brave they were to continue, in spite of the lashes that rained on their bloody backs. I had never seen such courage before. It stirred me with a passion to be equally strong. In my admiration I yearned to be one of them. I wanted to break through the bars of that cursed gate, to join that dreadful procession and help them carry their chains. I did not understand what they were asking for, but since they were willing to suffer for it, I felt sure they must be right. I was weeping with rage when I felt a hand grip my shoulder. A nun who had noticed our absence had come looking for us. Hurriedly she led us back to the chapel. I knew that after the evening service I would not escape being punished for my misbehavior. And when I received the 10 prescribed blows of the chicot, I held back my tears and my cries. With all the force of my soul I wanted to be like the brave blacks I had seen earlier, who wanted to be French citizens. The nuns realized that the girls had been badly shaken by what we had seen and heard that afternoon. They decided to make an effort to reassure us. At the evening meal in the dining hall, which was lugubriously lighted by storm lamps, Mother Therese gave us an official explanation of the events of the day. Far from convincing me, her reasons for the chaining and whipping of the men only added to my conviction that right must be on the prisoner's side. You see, my children, Mother Therese said, piously folding her hands to underline the morality of the lesson she was about to give us, these miserable Mukongo and Lari rebels have taken it into their heads to become French citizens. The word rebels sounded strange to me. It did not seem to apply to what I had seen. They want to have the same rights as Europeans. Mother Therese paused to let the awfulness of this idea sink in. They are committing a terrible sin of pride. Such mad ambition will lead them straight to hell. They have been inspired by the devil. Here Mother Therese crossed herself as a sign that we were to do the same. Let us pray to God to pardon them and to protect us. After 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, we were sent to our dormitory, 2 by 2, with strict orders not to speak again of the revolt. But I could not forget the feelings of passion that those bloodied black prisoners had stirred in me, as they filed past our barred gate. Chapter 2. Years of Misery, a Week of Happiness. When I think of my childhood in the orphanage, it seems to me that it was lived within a great earthenware pot, blackened by the smoke of a wood fire. A heavy cover enclosed us. We were trapped helplessly, with no way out. We never ceased to be hungry. What was pompously referred to as supper was usually a little manioc with chikwang asterisk and salt. Footnote: chikwang is fermented, boiled manioc. Made into a crust, it replaces bread. End footnote. On Sundays and feast days we were each given half of one sardine as a special treat. I always tried to get the tail of the sardine, if possible. On my plate of chipped enamel, I would flatten it gently, with love, stretching the oily flesh to give it the form, the illusion of being a whole fish. Then, joining my hands and closing my eyes, with all my might I would ask God to make a miracle for me as He did for Christ by transforming this half a sardine into a whole one. My stomach rumbled with hunger. I was so starved that I wanted to throw myself on that poor half a sardine, to devour it in a second. But no, it was absolutely necessary to keep my eyes closed and to pray with all my heart. Each time I opened my eyes I believed that this once I would find a whole sardine on my plate. But miracles were not to be performed for me, and I was never to find a whole sardine. A girl named Marie who had recently arrived at the orphanage told me that her father once gave her a whole can of sardines to eat for her birthday. I never believed anything Marie said after that. How was it possible for any person on earth to have a whole can of sardines for herself alone? From then on I knew that Marie was a liar, for I knew the truth, and the truth was that a whole sardine was not for the likes of us. Even today when I see a whole sardine on my plate I am astonished. All the splendid meals I've had during my later years have never served to erase the pain that I associate with one whole sardine. It was little Jesus, not Père Noël, we were told, who brought us a present at Christmas. Our presents were small things, like a needle or a rope of colored embroidery thread. When we were given a needle, we were expected to keep that needle the whole year. The needle was the essential tool of our instruction, our work. It was more important to us even than our meager portion of manioc. To lose one's needle was a serious offense. The nuns would smack your fingers hard and you were not given another one. If your needle broke, you took the part with the eye and sharpened the rough end on a hard stone until it was pointed enough to use again. Sometimes, girls had to work with a needle that was tiny, not more than a centimeter long. Once I lost my needle and for the rest of the year I had to sew with a lemon tree thorn. Lemon wood is tough and the thorn long and slender. After the bark has been removed and the wood has dried, it can be made into an acceptable needle by piercing it near the thick end with a red-hot real needle. The girl who had a real needle had a fortune, for the other girls would pay for the use of it with bon points. Africans are clever at making do with substitutes. With use, and sometimes a little oil, the thorn developed a patina and was smooth enough to glide through the coarse linens and simple fabrics that most of our work involved. Mending was our main job. We mended the priests' and nuns' socks and did large pattern embroidery work. We were not sewing fine fabrics like crepe de chine. For fine embroidery it was necessary to use a real needle, even if we had to borrow it. After working so long with my improvised lemon thorn, my wish, for the Christmas of that year, was to receive a new needle. I made many rosaries and novenas and did everything I could to be good enough to deserve a needle of my very own from little Jesus. A crèche scene was installed in our classroom, and there, on Christmas morning, we prayed. When we opened our eyes we found our presents. But alas, I did not find the needle for which I had tried so hard to be worthy. That was a terrible Christmas for me, without a needle. The nights at the orphanage were dreadful. Night, it seemed to me, was a great bird of prey that came and covered us, horrifying, with its black plumage. In my narrow iron bed, I rolled up in my coverlet, head and all, trying to escape the mosquitoes and to forget that night was outside. A hungry child never really sleeps. All night long I was aware of my hunger, listening to the sad, heavy sounds within my body. Occasionally an owl would screech, hauntingly, adding to my anguish, destroying my last threads of courage, for this inoffensive bird, we had been told, came from hell, and its cries were synonymous with bad omens. Hearing its fearful voice confirmed what I already knew, that tomorrow, again, would be a terrible day. Mother Elizabeth was one of the nuns whom I met at the orphanage, the very one who delivered me into this world. But she left when I was about 6 years old. The sisters wore habits of navy blue, made of a voluminous, floating cotton fabric. We found it beautiful as they walked. Their severe faces were outlined with a small white starched frame, from which a black veil fell over their shoulders. They must have had frightful lives before they joined the order. What else would make them savage small children as they did? Why else would they pinch a little girl's skin, twist it and yank, so that a piece came off in their fingers? March was the worst time of the year for us because it was then that the Sisters of St. Joseph de Cluny held a retreat. The orphanage was plunged into constant prayer and meditation, and we made the Stations of the Cross constantly before March 19th, which was the feast of Saint Joseph. No games or childish fun was permitted all month long. We were committed to unending rites to atone for our sins in the hope that, after millions of years in purgatory, we would be permitted to go to heaven. To reinforce our understanding of these ideas, we were shown large paintings of heaven, purgatory, and hell. Heaven was presented as a garden among the clouds where God sat, surrounded by nuns and priests. This gave some of us the idea to become nuns ourselves, in the hope of getting to heaven faster. We became so terrified about our sins that our bodies actually shook at the nuns' warnings and predictions. At night we suffered dreadful nightmares, sometimes screaming with fear. My God, how I dreaded the month of March. I was afraid. The nuns threatened us constantly, and kept us in a state of crawling submissiveness. We were unable to say a word against them. We were afraid of life and afraid of death. Our lives were already hideous, but they prepared even worse things ahead for us. In March, from the moment we rose in the morning until we went to bed at night, we were subjected to this dreadful ritual, the retreat. But in spite of their resources in teaching us religion, I remained unconvinced. There were too many contradictions between its principles and the way we girls were treated. I dreamed constantly of my enchanted days in the village of my ancestors. Faint memories of my happiness there, days of playing naked in the sun, nights of sleeping close against my mother on the mat, still haunted me. When life in the orphanage seemed unbearable, when I was longing to die, I would go to the window of our dormitory and there, alone, stare out at the trees in our compound. An enormous spreading avocado in the center of the court I privately named the Tree of Freedom. As I stood there at the window, the odor of the wall's clay bricks, softened by the rain, reminded me of the forests and glades where I took my first steps. I breathed in this scent deeply. It was delicate, full of nostalgia for me. I almost remembered the blackened clay pots of our meals, the smoke curling upward from the evening fires. I became obsessed by the odor of this gray clay. I returned to it again and again. It took possession of my whole frail body. One day, on a mad impulse, I put my lips to the cool, moist brick. The clay was soft as it had partly disintegrated in the rain, and now it melted in my mouth. My stomach, as usual, was empty and was racked with pains of hunger. I let the clay run like milk down my throat. My stomach accepted this strange offering with a rumble. Again I tasted the clay, and soon was sucking at the brick like a child at the breast of its mother. It was delicious, and perfectly smooth, without a single grain of sand to make the feast disagreeable. After that, I stopped eating almost entirely the vile food of the dining hall. I left the rotten bits of fish or meat on my plate and waited for the moment when I could return to the dormitory window and there, alone, fill my stomach with my secret new sustenance. When there was no rain and the bricks hardened, I brought some water in a little white enamel basin and gently moistened one of the bricks. When it was thoroughly wet, I brought my lips to it and abandoned myself to my pleasure. But while my eyes were lost in a dream, my ears were still alert, for I knew very well that I must not be discovered in this act. One day, however, I could not resist sharing my secret with my friend, Nanette. I told her of my discovery and showed her what I did. She tasted the clay and, finding it marvelous, she too became addicted. When everyone else was asleep at night, she and I would get up and go hungrily to our window and there carry out our unsanctified rite. One night, Cecile, who was a well-known stool pigeon, awakened and saw us at the window. She came stealthily to see what we were doing and caught us standing there, sucking at the clay. The next morning, of course, she tattled on us and we were called to the office of the Mother Superior's assistant, Sister Gonzaga. Her eyes flashed in horror when she learned what we had done. "What is the matter with you, Andrée? And you, Nanette? You are a disgrace to the orphanage. How could you do such a thing? Eating such filth, how disgusting. Words failed her. She twitched her robes and her long rosaries rattled. She turned to me, who she knew was the leader in the affair. Andrée, for some time your thinness and paleness have been a source of concern to us. No wonder you look like a ghost. We never dreamed you were capable of such folly. Now you'll see. Sister Gonzaga took us straight to the Mother Superior, who was equally appalled and furious. I knew by her face that the worst possible punishments were ahead for us. Mother, I begged, whatever else, please don't deprive me of the clay. I need it. When I don't have enough to eat, it fills me up and comforts me. I burst into tears and threw myself at her feet. Please don't whip me. Mother, I didn't mean to do anything wrong. My entreaties were useless. I was whipped and then carried, half fainting, to the infirmary. The nurse who examined me there was alarmed at my condition. My stomach was hard as a rock. A doctor was called immediately. She must be taken at once to the Pasteur Institute, he said. This was the most prestigious medical facility in Brazzaville. There several doctors leaned over my thin body, pressed my stomach, pulled down my lower eyelids to look at the whites of my eyes and spoke of my health as if it were something that mattered. If only I had known about this, I thought. I would have done something a long time ago. The doctors looked grave. They diagnosed imminent peritonitis and chronic anemia. In addition, a stool analysis revealed many parasites, and a blood test showed malaria. Because my case was so serious, the Institute made a report on it to the French administration. This resulted in a request for a report on the health of all the girls at the orphanage. Such charitable institutions were cited as examples of the beneficent effect of colonialism on the native population, and the orphanage could not be allowed to appear in a bad light. The French were becoming increasingly sensitive to criticism of their colonial policies. The nuns were told that each girl was to bring a stool specimen to the Pasteur Institute for analysis. This announcement created great excitement. Immediately there was a scramble among the girls to find a suitable container. The kind of tin can in which tomatoes and other vegetables are preserved was considered ideal. The can was rigorously scrubbed, all the rust removed to make it impeccable for this extraordinary commission. On the appointed day, we girls were marshaled into groups of 10. Then, each girl holding her precious container covered with a piece of paper on which her name was written, we marched proudly across town to the Pasteur Institute. At the laboratory the technician asked us, "Would you like to see what is living in your intestines?" Never before had any of us looked into a microscope. Now we took turns putting our eyes to the lens to look at the smears on the slides. We were fascinated and petrified by what we saw. On a brilliantly lit field dozens of dreadful-looking creatures writhed and struggled with each other. There were round worms and flat worms and the worm that will crawl after you on the ground. There was the ver solitaire, and besides the worms, many other nightmarish, flagellating, oozing forms. Even the laboratory personnel were appalled and wondered that we weren't dead. After the girls recovered from the first shock of what they had seen, they made a competition of their parasite count. "Oh, I have much more than you. But Claudine has the most of all." We were given vermifuge medicine, and after these treatments began to take on more weight. But our eyes were often yellow with jaundice and many of us were still very anemic. I was kept at the hospital for blacks for a week and given many purgatives and irrigations in order to get rid of the clay packed in my intestines. The food there was not much different from what we had at the orphanage, salted fish and manioc, but it was of a better quality, and to my delight, I was allowed much more of it. Because of the deplorable condition in which the girls were found, the doctors came to inspect the orphanage for mosquito-breeding pools of water and to see that certain rudimentary elements of hygiene were enforced. French officials questioned us girls about the schooling we received, and how we were treated. When they asked me, I was forthright in telling them how often we were whipped and how little we were fed. My answers got back to the nuns who professed to be wounded by my treachery. If they had found me a difficult child before, they now saw me as a troublemaker of worrisome potential. Until then the nuns had been free to abandon themselves to their impulses in dealing with us. A child who complained about her treatment was only whipped more. The black mothers could do nothing, and the nuns knew there was little to fear from the white fathers who, in placing the child in the convent's care, showed that the child's happiness and well-being was of little concern to him. Guilt-ridden and indebted to the nuns for relieving them of a social nuisance, these men were not in a position to protest about the treatment of their children, if indeed the idea ever occurred to them. The nuns had no one to account to for their actions except the authorities in the French administration. With my childish illness, unwittingly, I had touched the very point on which they were most vulnerable. Several weeks after making my deposition to the officials, I was called before Mother Gonzaga, who had always been very severe with me. After pointing out that what I had told the officials had brought difficulties to the orphanage, she informed me that I was a wretched ingrate. "How could you say such things, after all we have done for you?" she demanded. She did not really expect an answer. Since our meals had improved slightly and punishments had been less harsh, I did not want to lose what we had, so I listened in silence. "My daughter," Mother Gonzaga said, "the trouble with you is that you are the victim of pride. It will land you in hell. Truly, I pity you." She lifted her head higher, as if to put more distance between us. "You don't seem to understand that it is more difficult for us to keep you than for you to stay with us. It is only because of the generosity of our holy order that we endure it. You should thank God on your knees for bringing you, a child of sin, into this temple of purification." I had thought quite a bit about this sin which was laid to us for being born of mixed blood. It seemed to me that since we had not asked to be born and since we had nothing to say about the mixing of our blood, the blame for the sin of it, if it were a sin, should be laid on the proper doorstep. "I don't see why we should have to be subjected to penances all our lives for what our parents did," I said with spirit. Mother Gonzaga gasped. "You are a shameless rebel, my child. What is the matter with you? Why can't you be docile and good like the other girls?" I considered this. I was more mutinous than the others, more quick to be angry about the injustices in our situation. Could it be because I had a stronger sense of my own honor and dignity? Or was it because I was more unhappy? "The other girls," I said slowly, "at least have the comfort of visits from their black relatives. But since I've been here, I have had visits from no one. Perhaps I have less reason to be good." "What you have more of," said Mother Gonzaga quickly, "is the wickedness of your father and the primitive nature of your mother." How it pricked me to hear my mother spoken of in this way. "I have no reason to be ashamed of my mother," I said, tears coming to my eyes. Seeing this, Mother Gonzaga decided to adopt a more subtle approach. "You are not a wicked girl, Andrée. You have a good heart, and this can save you, if only you will stifle your pride and learn to live with the reality of the life that has been given to you." What was the reality of our life as she saw it? That we, the children of a night of love in a hut, should pay for that sin for the rest of our lives. That because the woman was black, the embrace was shameful and the love impure. Therefore it was normal for us to be torn from our mothers, to be herded into orphanages, to be humiliated into resignation and obedience, and to expect nothing more of life than to become a house servant for whites. In spite of the negative tone of the lecture that Mother Gonzaga had given me, there was to be an unexpected result. She had, in fact, heard my words, and not long afterward it was announced that my father and his wife were coming to see me. For the first time since they had put me in the orphanage 5 years earlier, I was to have a visit. For this occasion the nuns dressed me in my Sunday best. Our wardrobes consisted of 2 dresses, one for every day, a patched and pieced affair, usually a hand-me-down from another boarder who had outgrown it, and another dress for Sundays and feast days. For my father's visit, and this was most unusual, I was given a pair of shoes to wear. Ordinarily we went barefoot, which, we were told, would help us to avoid the sin of pride. These shoes pinched my feet horribly, but I wore them without complaint, for I took them as a sign of rehabilitation. The visit, which lasted about half an hour, took place in the presence of the Mother Superior, who kept a tight rein on the whole interview. She did not leave us alone together for an instant. When I spoke, timidly, in answer to the few questions my father put to me, she fixed her eyes on me warningly. In fact, to make sure that I said nothing untoward, she stationed herself next to me, and while she and my father were talking, continually caressed my hair. This was a strange new sensation for me. But even more strange were the things she said about me. I almost thought she was speaking of someone else. In honeyed tones, smiling as if I were one of her favorites, as if the entire convent found me a jewel, she averred that I was a good girl, pious, obedient, and charitable. In short, a model of Christian virtues. Now that my father was there, miraculously, I was no longer the bad seed of the orphanage. My father touched my shoulder and expressed concern about my extreme thinness. The Mother Superior hastened to reassure him about this. It was only due to my growth and the approach of puberty. Children of mixed blood, she said with a conspiratorial air, are particularly precocious, you know. Throughout their exchanges I remained stiffly silent, although my heart was beating hard. I wanted desperately to throw myself into my father's arms and tell him the truth about our existence there, that it was the bad treatment and rotten food that made us skin and bones. But the Mother Superior's eyes were fixed on me. I knew I could not, and the few words I said were evasive. To keep from revealing my desire and my fear, I kept my eyes lowered. My father realized I was hiding something, but he was unable to ask me what it was. To keep him from probing, the Mother Superior adopted a confidential tone. You see how Andrée is. Such an introverted child. She never will tell one anything. When I heard this, I felt desperate. I wanted so much to confide in this father whom I did not know, but who, I believed, in spite of everything, cared for me. But it was impossible to speak. With a few more polite exchanges, the visit came to a close. I dutifully kissed the cheeks of the two strangers who were before me, and they left. There was only one consolation to this dreadful event. Before leaving, my father said that my mother would come to see me. I hardly dared trust the comfort that this promise brought to my aching heart. I was soon to be 9 years old, and I still did not know my black mother toward whom my thoughts were constantly turning. Was it true that she would come? Would I, at last, see the face that haunted my nights, the face that I imagined in the shadows, leaning over my little iron bed? While white relatives were given the honors of the St. Joseph and St. Mary parlor, visits with black relatives were quite unsupervised. They took place on a bench under a palm tree in the courtyard. It was of no concern to the nuns what the girls told their black mothers. Complaining to them was quite useless. I often watched, with a stealthy greed, when one of the other girls received a visit from her black mother. Stationed at a window, unable to tear myself away from the sight, I noticed every detail. How they embraced when they met. How the mother took her daughter on her lap, and held her. What a feeling that must be. Usually, after their greetings, the mother would open a cloth, spread it on the ground and take out something to eat. My stomach grinding with hunger, I stared as the mother smiled and talked while her daughter ate. Would such happiness ever be mine? One evening, 3 months later, Mother Therese called me, Andrée. Come here at once. I thought, what is it this time? Now what am I going to be whipped for? But the nun's voice sounded different from usual as she said, You have a visitor. My heart beat fast. A visitor? Who is it? Your mother. My mother? My legs began to tremble so that I feared they would not support me. Yes, she's waiting for you. Come. But I couldn't move. I thought I would make Pippi on the spot. Mother Therese had to take my hand and lead me. My frail body shaking with emotion, I let myself be led out to the courtyard. Please, God, I prayed, let her be alone. If she were in a group of visitors, I feared I might not recognize her. Twilight was falling. There was only one woman, not much taller than I, there, under the palm tree. She was smiling and she seemed to me the most beautiful woman in the world. Her arms stretched toward me. Released from my terror, I flew to her. Maman. My maman. With a cry of joy she swept me into her embrace. She hugged me close, close. For many moments we just held one another, she laughing, I sobbing with happiness. My face buried in her breast, I no longer felt like an orphan. I had my mother to touch and love. After a time, finally, we were able to talk. She spoke to me in Sango. I couldn't understand. It astonished her to find that I could speak nothing but French. So, as best she could, she spoke to me in French, but it was not her tongue. For me, however, talking was of no importance. I was so overcome by my feelings that just to look at her for hours would have been enough for me. Your father has been kind, she said. Searching for the words in French, she went on. He paid for my boat trip, so I could come to see you. And he asked the police commissioner to give me a laissez-passer. I have permission to stay for 1 week. Only 1 week, maman, I was stricken. After 5 long years, alone, 5 years without my mother's tenderness, I was to have only 1 short week of her? Why was my happiness to be so brief? I began to cry again. As best she could, she comforted me. Night fell quickly. The nuns insisted that my mother leave, as I had to appear in the dining hall for the evening meal. But she would return early the next morning, she promised, as she kissed me goodbye. The other girls were astonished to learn of my visit. After all this time it was a great surprise to them to learn that I too possessed a real mother. They were eager to hear what happened between us in the courtyard. When dinner was over and we had escaped from the nuns, they plied me with questions. What was my mother like? Was she young? What had she said? Had I told her how they whipped us? I gave my friends the best account I could, but to tell the truth I could not really picture my mother except as a kind of dream. In the evening shadows, paralyzed by my feelings, I had not really made out the features of my black mother. All night long I turned in my bed, thinking of her smile, that smile for which I have never, anywhere, found an equal. Her appearance the next morning, in the sunlight, overwhelmed me. She was so young, so beautiful. From the windows where I had often watched, now my companions, tender or envious, watched me as I ran with pride and joy to the bench where my mother was waiting for me. She had dressed that day with all the coquetry in the world, to win her daughter's heart. Like other women of that period, she wore a camisole top, and on her head was a silk kerchief, embroidered with little flowers. Her skirt was red and fringed with a lace that was sparkling white. Enormous green and yellow bracelets shone on her slim arms. She wore a necklace of the same colors, and dangling earrings. The whole effect was a bit gaudy, accustomed as I was to our sober attire in the convent, but I soon forgot this and was looking only at her face. I had never seen an expression so sweet. She had powdered herself abundantly, up to the base of her throat, as was the custom after bathing in our country. It was considered very chic, very évolué, to have a collar of talcum powder, there, and in the creases of one's arms, everywhere one might perspire. One of my first impressions of my mother was of a heavenly fragrance. My sense of her was impregnated with the wonder of this. "You smell so good, Maman," I murmured, in my awe. "It's my powder," she laughed. "Do you like it? Tomorrow I'll bring you some." On her feet my mother wore slippers made by the Ausa shoemakers of her country. These sandals with wooden heels were called mapapa. They clacked when the women walked. It was one of the affectations of our people. To my delight, my mother had brought a smaller pair of these slippers for me. I put them on at once. At last my feet were shod in something of their very own. My mother was completely natural and spontaneous with me. She did exactly what came into her head. She played with me as if I were her doll. "Your hair is light brown, like your father's," she pronounced with great pride, "and should be gone down to long braids." Shaking them out, she combed my hair so that it fell in waves over my back. Next, she took off my clothes. She wanted to look at my body, to touch it. She wanted to know me completely. I didn't have on any panties, she found, to her dismay. "Why are you like this, without panties?" she complained. "You should wear panties. And your dress is full of patches." "Why? The daughter of Pierre Gerbalat should not be dressed like this." Some of the girls were watching us from the windows, and when they saw what my mother was doing they were scandalized. "Oh, my God," they gasped. "She's taking the clothes off her daughter." I didn't want her to do it. I was holding my arms over my body because it was strictly forbidden to take your clothes off with other people looking. I tried to hide myself inside my chemise. But laughing gaily, my mother insisted on removing everything and studying my small brown body. She played with my hair, arranging it over my bare shoulders and back, according to her taste. Turning me this way and that, she admired the effect that it made. Finally, to my relief, she dressed me again.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. We will pick up. We are in Chapter 2. We'll pick up there. Years of Misery, A Week of Happiness. In my book, we'll be at kind of the midpoint of page 30 for next Thursday. Last Thursday of September, unless I'm mistaken. Is that true? Yep. Last Thursday of September. That's who we'll be. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 #. Press *61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. All righty, let's see. I'll get through last of our emails, then we'll get our callers. I'll share my notes, and we will be all done for this week. Let's see. So we're picking up in Chapter 2. We never cease to be hungry. Hunger in non-white children has been a recurrent theme over several recent book clubs. 2, our lives were already hideous, but they prepared even worse things ahead for us. In March, from the moment we rose in the morning until we went to bed at night, we were subjected to this dreadful ritual, the retreat. Echoes of Jonestown, white nights, yes, yes. 3, one day on a mad impulse, I put my lips to the cool, moist brick. The clay was soft as it had partly disintegrated in the rain, and now it melted in my mouth. Reminds me of the eating of lead paint chips by non-white child victims. For real, I thought that's what it was at first. I had to go back like, oh, wait a minute, it's not, because they say with the lead paint, you know, it's sweet, and so the children, I was like, oh my God, they got lead paint. Oh, wait a minute, this is clay. It's not the lead. You got to read careful. But yes, pause for Freddie Gray. 4, Your father has been kind, she said, searching for the words. In French, she went on. He paid for my boat trip. As victims, we are so susceptible to giving credit for the most meager acts of so-called kindness given to us by suspected racists. Absolutely. The one, even this dialogue where her mother is stunned that she can only speak in French. Of course, we're not going to teach you any of those heathen Negro sounds. You can't even call that a language. Duh, you're only going to speak French. So she's got to struggle to communicate with her own daughter. And this way your dad paid for the trip. And your father has been kind. What? What? We've even had that before. Racists can be kind. We've had a number of examples of that. Some days they do not come out and anally rape your son in front of you. Some days they might even give you an extra slice of cornbread and an extra piece of watermelon, and they don't rape anyone in your family. Kind. I don't know if I would say they were kind, just, well, Master gave me 2 pieces of cornbread today, 2 pieces of watermelon. Nobody got raped. That does not constitute kindness. Even the purchasing of the trip fare, I mean, dang, if they have robbed and looted the whole world, probably would be pretty, oh, yeah, you need my favorite side piece, man. That's common, right? If this is my favorite side piece, oh, man, we get you a first-class flight, man. I'm going to be hanging out. Come on, hang out with me. Wait a minute. What, is the wife going to be? Next weekend. You come out next weekend, first class, fly you on out here, and we kick it tough, man. Let's see. 5, how proud she was of me, the child of a white man. Her only child, she was touching in her love for my father, whose name she wore tattooed on her forearm as part of the marriage ritual of our people. There is no such thing as love in a system of racism, white supremacy, for sure. Certainly ain't no romances on the plantation. I mean, anywho, let's see. Folks who dialed in, much obliged for folks who wrote in. Folks who dialed in, if you have commentary to share. Victim in New Jersey. Lauren should be with us. *61 for other callers.
Hey, Gus. Let me see. Okay. I was pondering. I was wondering. She says, I wanted to be brave like the men who wanted to be Frenchmen. So I was confused. I mean, were they brave because they revolted, or was they brave because they were asserting that they wanted to be Frenchmen? So I was, I definitely need a bit more context with that passage, but I mean, if the bravery came with them wanting to be Frenchmen, man, that's tragic. That's real tragic. But maybe I can interpret that they wanted to be treated as equals, as Frenchmen, So, however that was phrased, I don't know. That disturbed me. The sardines and the hunger. I also thought about Mahmoud. Just keeping the children hungry. I also, when the father came to visit, and she received shoes. Normally she wouldn't have shoes, so the nuns were their own kind of codification, where it was like, okay, listen, we can't let them look. They already look like they down bad. We can't have them looking that down bad. We can at least give them shoes when their parents are coming to visit. This might be out of context, but for some reason, when I was, just thinking about their experience in this kind of school or boarding school, I just thought of Super Baby, the Nazi. Reason being, these children that have this yearning for acceptance, for the acceptance of their white fathers. So I would want to know, as they become adults, how will they function in society? Who will they become? Especially when we often talk about these countries, with African countries, Caribbean countries, and when these confused people come of age, what if they rise to the heights of politics with that confusion, govern nations of black people? I thought about that. She said that she wanted to tell her father about her condition, to explain to him the reason why she was so skinny. That also too is tragic, because you would assume if this father truly cared and loved his child, he would notice that. I don't even really think that would have to be, she would have to tell, once you come in, you're a white man. You see healthy white children, I'm assuming. So you know what a child is supposed to look like physically, a healthy child. The mother, she, to her credit, she stripped her down. She noticed that she wasn't wearing underwear. So the mother was able to notice that, something wasn't right or incorrect with her child, and the father couldn't. But, man, it's tragic, because now I just see a group of children, for the rest of their lives, they're going to consciously or subconsciously be always looking for the approval of their white father, looking for the approval of white society. I close.
Well, I reckon we can pay attention. We've got to chapter 2 in this book, and especially once we get to part 2, as she's an adult person, we can see, is she seeking the approval of her white father, or does he get mentioned? Did they talk, chatted up, all that good stuff? We shall see. Let's see. Lauren, any other folks with commentary to share? Much obliged. Victim in New Jersey.
Yes, sir. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. We left off on the part at the end of the first session where the black males were yelling that they wanted to be French citizens, and I translated that as to they wanted to be treated like white people. And when we came back, it said, what evil, we asked ourselves, did these simple words contain? Why were those who used them so cruelly treated? And let me see. It said, in spite of the fact that they were being whipped, the prisoners continued to shout their demands. I thought to myself, those weren't demands. They were just desires and or requests. And also, when they went back into the orphanage, the white nuns said they want to have the same rights as Europeans. Mother Teresa, which I guess that's ironic, paused to let the awfulness of this idea sink in. They are committing a terrible sin of pride. Such mad ambition will lead them straight to hell. They've been inspired by the devil. So these black males are going to hell because they want to be treated like white people, or better yet, they just don't want to be mistreated. And I don't think there's anything incorrect or abnormal about not wanting to be mistreated. And then it said, after 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, we were sent to our dormitory 2 by 2 with strict orders not to speak again of the revolt. That made me think of Ruston, Louisiana, where they were told not to talk about that lynching, and Bill Russell's Second Wind. The part, all right, I know the caller in New Jersey talked about the sardine, but she said a girl named Marie who had recently arrived at the orphanage told me that her father once had given her a whole can of sardines to eat for her birthday. I never believed anything Marie said after that. How was it possible for any person on earth to have a whole can of sardines for herself alone? From then on, I knew that Marie was a liar, for I knew the truth, and the truth was that a whole sardine was not for the likes of us. Even today, when I see a whole sardine on my plate, I am astonished. All the splendid meals I've had during my later years have never served to erase the pain that I associate with one whole sardine. And I thought that part was just so sad. The part about the needles and the lemon tree thorn, man. Let me see. Oh, Mother Elizabeth, she was talking about her, being one of the nuns at the orphanage, and she said she was the very one who delivered her into the world. And she said she left again when she was about 6 years old, and the sisters wore habits of navy blue made of a voluminous floating cotton fabric. We found it beautiful as they walked. And I thought to myself, that's a common response to mistreatment, to identify with the mistreaters, think they're beautiful, want to be like them. Many people want to be beautiful and to have beautiful clothes. There's nothing crazy about that. I just noted it. And she was talking about the nuns, the white ladies, and she said they must have had frightful lives before they joined the order. What else would make them savage small children as they did? Why else would they pinch a little girl's skin, twist it, and yank so that a piece came off in their fingers? That sounds terrible, but I thought maybe just because they're child-abusing racists, when she realizes she can eat the clay. I don't need to read the whole thing, but I thought that might have just been pica brought on by intense hunger. She tells Nanette, she says, one day, however, I could not resist sharing my secret with my friend Nanette. Once 2 black people know a thing, it is not a secret. It wasn't a secret. She went to the hospital, which it was probably for the best that she went to the hospital. But she did get a bit of punishment for that. She got in trouble for, I wouldn't even call it snitching. She got in trouble for telling the white people at the hospital what the white women at the orphanage were doing to her, describing the way she was being mistreated. I think, the father, he comes, Pierre. When Pierre comes to visit her, he didn't even want to talk to her alone. I mean, he comes with the wife and has a nun there. It's not even meant to be any sort of actual interaction, exchange of ideas. Let me hear what it is that you have to say. He did it more like a duty. I don't know. There's no evidence that he actually cares about this little girl. Let me see. Oh, and I just thought it was really manipulative on the nun's part to stay there during the visit, and also she said she continually caressed her hair. That was just, it made me feel weird. I don't have a word for that other than weird and maybe inappropriate. It has to be something better. I just can't think of it. And she hadn't seen her mother in so long that she was so afraid she couldn't move, and she said she thought she would make pee-pee on the spot. That part was very sad to me. I was glad, though, that the mother, even though they couldn't speak the same language, the mother brought her something to eat, brought her some shoes, looked over her body, expressed displeasure. She thought it was incorrect that she didn't have on any underwear. It seems like the mother actually cared, even though I don't know. And the embarrassment she felt when she got undressed, like, I get it. She said, I didn't want her to do it. I was holding my arms over my body because it was strictly forbidden to take your clothes off with other people looking. And that made me think of Dr. Welsing's interpretation of the Adam and Eve mythology at the beginning of the Christian Bible. And that's all I have for now. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Much obliged, Lauren. Dr. Welsing does talk about that as a tenet of white supremacy, the shame of the melanin deficient skin that people classified as white have. But I'm just noting the contradiction, like if it's, hey, you're not supposed to be naked in front of anybody else, why is Pierre looking at these two children bathe? Now, if it's one is your wife, like, oh, okay, but her sister, that's not your wife. Religion of white supremacy. Let's see. Go back, see if I can do the notes that I have for the second portion, and then we'll be done for the day. I have to see if I can get a picture of the Chakotay's before next week. Let's see. They have audio of white people saying here, one of the worst things in the world, proud Negro, uppity Negroes. They would much rather have Negroes who are proud to be Negroes. You're just happy with things just as they are on the plantation. Let's see. Inspired by the devil. See, everything is framed. The religion of white supremacy racism. If you misbehave, you're being sinful. You're going to hell. And they got pictures of hell everywhere. And the devil looks just like you. Dang. Let's see. The whole sardine, like, wow. Just wow. A can of, I even think like back then, like, really? A can of sardines? Like, at what time period would it be like, whoa, you got, maybe during the Great Depression, maybe. But I mean, dang, like, you got a whole can. You are a born light. Just wow. Let's see. Even during the COVID-19 scare, the worst of it, I don't ever remember being like, oh, you got a whole bag of potato chips to yourself. What? I don't ever remember, like, no. Let's see. When she talks about that part, this twisting the little girl's skin and pulling it off in their hand, like, just, again, this is direct attack on black flesh, and there's so much of that, scalding a person and lashing a person and just all of that. They don't even let you have clothes. That's in Delectable Negro too. We don't let you have clothes, to keep you nude. All of that. They're just literally scratching your skin off and pulling it off, and just, wow, white genetic annihilation. And then you should have shame about your flesh. You can't even, take a shit. Well, unless the child rapists are around. Other than that, you're supposed to be shameful about your flesh. Let's see. She said, Cecil, who is a well-known stool pigeon. They got the name calling even at a young age. I suspect Cecil is a non-white person doing the snitching to go get one of the nuns. But that is about what you can expect on the plantation. No secrets in lots of ways. Sometimes you don't even have to tell anybody. They just observe what's happening and, uh-oh, I'm going to go tell. Let's see. All eyes on you, indeed. Let's see. She said I was kept at a hospital for the blacks, so maybe that's that. That reminded me as well, there are lots of, even a high number of individuals classified as white, particularly in the South, eating dirt and got a lot of those same ailments and parasites and such. Like, man, let's see. She got better quality food and a higher quantity of it because she could eat as much as she wanted to get her weight and health up, thankfully. Let's see. I said a child who complained about her treatment was only whipped more. Man, the black mothers could do nothing, and the nuns knew there was little to fear from the white fathers who, in placing the child in the covenant's care, showed that the child's happiness and well-being was of little concern to him. White people don't care about children. Incidentally, that right there kind of made me think that the term mother doesn't really apply to the black mom, because they say right there, like, man, black mothers could do nothing. Then that's the logic why Mr. Fuller says attempted parents can't be mother, or if you can't be in a position where you can do nothing to aid your child who's being harmed. You do not qualify for the title as mother. Now, they said for the white fathers, they have the ability, but they're not willing. Don't care about children, especially some nigger. Let's see. She says when the nuns let her know, like, we heard that you snitched on us. You ratted on us, mistreating you and all the rest of it. We didn't appreciate it. She said, man, I didn't want to lose the little bit of meals that we had gained. So be careful, like, woo, as a child, cabinet, man, let's see. The nuns stay there to spy on her. This is so plantational. When her white, racist, child-raping dad comes to visit, and they stay to spy. They make sure this nigger child doesn't, snitch on us again. We see you. We got our eyes. Like, man, that is so plantational. Or penitentiary. That's what, the guards, you get visiting time, and they say, we're going to be listening in on your calls and conversations. Make sure you're not trying to tunnel out of here or nothing. Let's see. Then when the dad is, man, she looks kind of puny. What, she, everything all right? Hey, these children of mixed blood. Like, they just make up. One more to Dr. Wellwood, pseudo-scientific. They just make it up on the spot too. Like, let's see. Oh no, these old mixed race children. They got that old finicky appetite and things. They don't even gain weight sometimes. They have to wait a while. Funny. Like, what? You got me eating clay around here? And then make it that it's something defective about me to explain this. But oh no, we just been starving. They can't even get a sardine around here. I mean, one sardine, not a whole can. Let's see. Mom comes to visit, much more vested, even though she doesn't qualify for the title, can't do anything. But she at least does check on her, and there's something like that to let me see, like, take your clothes off. Let's see, have you been beaten and mauled? Have they pulled your skin? Why don't you have underwear? Like, what is going on here? That is what a parent should be doing, especially in this sort of environment. Like, good God. Let's see. I reckon save the rest until... I reckon I'll save the rest until... I'll save the rest until next week. Anywho, lots more to come. We just got started in the text. We'll have even more in chapter 2 and then beyond. But really looking forward to this book. I suspect we have a number of listeners who are not super informed about Congolese history and such, so lots to learn. If anything, you can keep in mind, this is the area of the world George Foreman, Muhammad Ali, Rumble in the Jungle happened here. Anywho, we'll be here tomorrow neutralizing workplace racism. Much obliged for folks tuning in. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling, stool pigeons. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Cow signing out. Another one right here. The kings and queens of throwaway offspring stash you at the orphanage. They will deposit you at the orphanage. Racist man. Racist J. Strom Thurmond to Pierre Congo to South Carolina. Usual suspects. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.